Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a sun-drenched, sheep-scented slice of ancient myth that you probably weren't expecting. Picture it. Soft hills, lazy clouds, and a god with the world's most impractical resume being sentenced to rural punishment. That's right, you're about to follow Apollo, the radiant, silver-voiced Greek god of music, prophecy, and not knowing how to hold a shovel, as he is forcibly reassigned to cattle duty. The punishment is divine, the cows are deeply unimpressed, and you're tagging along for every odd, slow, and sleepy step of it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge beside Apollo, who is not for the first time pouting. His golden hair catches every glint of sunlight, and his sandals are far too clean for this part of Thessaly. As always, he looks like someone carved from vanity and harp music, and you look like someone who had to get up at dawn to help a disgraced god navigate sheep droppings. Zeus has had enough. Apollo, in all his bright-limbed glory, has crossed some divine line again, possibly by hurling another one of his sacred arrows at someone who questioned his singing. Or maybe it was that time he tried to start a music school on Mount Olympus that ended in flames and minor smiting. Historians still argue whether it was truly Apollo's hubris or just bad luck with lyre acoustics in the marble halls. In any case, Zeus has sentenced him to do time, so to speak, not in Tartarus, no, nothing that dramatic. Just good old-fashioned mortal labor. Specifically, herding cows for a human king, which is for Apollo the equivalent of being told to wash dishes for eternity. He's still glowing faintly with divine irritation. You arrive with him at the edge of King Admetus's pasturelands. There are cows grazing languidly, the occasional fly buzzing like a lazy tambourine, and a farmhand asleep under a fig tree. So quiet that even your breathing feels rude. Apollo mutters, "They smell." You look at him. They're cows. "They didn't tell me they'd smell." He's aghast. This is going to be a long few years. You follow him up the dusty trail to a modest stable where a man in a sun-bleached cloak is arguing with a mule. This is Admetus, who is currently unaware that he's about to hire a god to oversee his livestock. He turns as you approach, squinting at the golden stranger beside you. "Do you herd?" Admetus asks without much hope. Apollo straightens up, brushes imaginary dirt from his tunic, and nods solemnly. "Absolutely," he lies. You do your best not to laugh. To his credit, Admetus doesn't ask questions. Maybe it's the faint glow Apollo gives off in the shade, or maybe the guy just really needs help. Either way, the god of archery and plague is hired on the spot. And so begins Apollo's time as the world's most overqualified cowherd. At first, he tries to bring Olympian flair to the job. He whistles to the cows, expecting them to line up in a harmonious A major. They respond by chewing slowly and ignoring him. He gestures grandly toward the watering trough, only to trip and fall in it himself. There is an awkward moment where he tries to compose a working song to encourage the animals, something between a hymn and a lullaby. It only works on himself. You have to wake him up when he nods off in the haystack mid-verse. Apollo sulks. "Why do they not obey me? They're cows." You remind him gently. "They don't even obey gravity sometimes." Still, he persists. He tries memorizing each one's name. He braids their tails into complex knots that he insists are divine sigils for good luck. He starts carving tiny lyres out of fence posts when he's bored. He carves a particularly elegant one for a calf named Polyphonia. Meanwhile, the cows are perfectly content. One even nudges Apollo affectionately. He recoils. "She licked me." "Congratulations," you say. "You've been accepted." And yet, behind Apollo's dramatic sighs and eye rolls, something begins to shift. He's still awful at milking, but he talks to the cows now. He asks one named Hesper for advice on rhythm. He confides in another, Callis, about his suspicions that Zeus only punishes him because he's too talented. You don't say it aloud, but you're starting to suspect the cows might actually like him. Still, you can't help but wonder, how long can a god really fake being mortal before something divine slips out again? And indeed, that moment is coming, and it will involve singing cattle, a suspiciously lush field, and a cow that may or may not leave actual gold wherever it walks. But for now, Apollo sits beside you in the pasture, hair glowing like it forgot how to be subtle, a lyre in his lap, and a cow gently chewing on his sandal strap. You close your eyes, leaning back against the sun-warmed fence. Somewhere in the distance, a sleepy breeze shifts the hay and a bird calls lazily overhead. The cows shift content. Apollo hums something quiet and haunting, and for once he doesn't sound proud, just peaceful. You decide not to tell him there's a cow stuck in the olive grove again. That's tomorrow's problem. The morning begins as it often does in Thessaly, with dew on the grass, a hint of goat in the air, and Apollo trying to coax a cow off the roof of a chicken coop. You're not sure how it got up there. Neither is Apollo. The cow isn't helping. The first official day of his divine punishment is already off to a promising start. Despite his celestial glow and track record of slaying serpents, Apollo isn't exactly blending in with the other herdsmen. For one thing, he keeps trying to herd the cattle with a golden staff that doubles as an instrument. For another, his idea of protective footwear involves sandals stitched with sapphires. He's radiant, slightly singed from yesterday's sunburn, and visibly struggling with what mortals call mud. You squint at his perfectly white tunic, now polka-dotted with hoof prints. You sure you've done this before? Apollo glares at you, then at the cow. Of course. I once cared for Helios's sun chariot goats. Those weren't goats. And you set one on fire. Semantics. He wipes his hands on what might once have been an embroidered sash from Delos and Sighs. No one told me cowherding involved so many cows. The cows, meanwhile, seem entirely unbothered by their glamorous new guardian. One of them, Hermia, has taken a liking to Apollo and follows him around like an oversized dog, mooing plaintively every time he disappears behind a tree. Apollo is unimpressed. Why does she look at me like that? Like what? Like she expects poetry. She's a cow. She probably expects hay. Apollo sits down on a boulder and surveys the field. The hills roll out like sleeping giants in the distance, and a soft wind stirs the grass in gentle ripples. You have to admit, it's not a bad place for exile. But there's a problem. A god, especially one prone to dramatics, can't just do a job. He has to transform it. So Apollo tries to beautify herding. He arranges the cows in spirals. He composes short odes to each of them. He insists on naming all the bulls after musical modes: Dorian, Phrygian, Mixolydian. You watch as he stands on a hilltop, arms raised, trying to get the herd to respond to a choral call and response. They do respond by stampeding in the opposite direction. One of them knocks over a grain silo. Another eats part of a laundry line. Apollo, dazed, dusts himself off. Progress. The townsfolk start to notice the strange new herder. Rumors spread that he glows under moonlight, that the cows now sleep in neat rows, that butter production has mysteriously doubled. A few claim that when Apollo sings, the milk curdles just right for the softest cheese in Thessaly. Historians still argue whether this was divine intervention or just a very enthusiastic dairymaid who figured out timing. Meanwhile, Admetus, the king who hired him, finally returns from a hunting trip and gets his first look at Apollo in action. He stares as Apollo performs a complex roundelay involving 3 flutes, 1 harp, and a confused goose. The cows are entranced. So are the shepherds. Admetus folds his arms. Are you trying to enchant my cows? Apollo beams. It's working. The king blinks slowly. Just don't make them float. That afternoon, Apollo tries something more traditional. You watch as he uses sunlight to dry out the hay more quickly. He gets the angle just right, and within minutes, the entire barn smells like warm grass and light. Unfortunately, he forgets that hay is flammable. The barn has to be rebuilt. You both spend the evening apologizing to the carpenter and chasing a goat with a half-burnt tail. But slowly, surprisingly, Apollo begins to adapt. You catch him, one evening, resting under the stars with Hermia, humming to her as she snoozes beside him. There's no lyre in his hands, just stillness, and the occasional blink as fireflies float past. I think I'm getting better, he murmurs. At cowherding? At being boring. You chuckle. It suits you. He throws a twig at you. There's a rhythm forming now. Morning feedings, noon milking, evening songs. Apollo starts braiding garlands from metaflowers, 1 for each cow. You find a particularly fancy one on Hermia with delicate white blossoms tucked behind her ear. Some of the other herdsmen are less sure what to make of it. One insists the cows are too calm now. Another complains that their dreams have become weirdly poetic. But you're starting to like this new pace. The days grow long and golden. Apollo hums to himself as he counts the cattle. His sandals are no longer spotless, and his tunic now has a patch sewn on by a shepherd's wife who doesn't know she's mending godly couture. Then, one morning, something shifts. You notice it first when you follow Apollo to the far field where a cow is grazing at the edge of the woods. The grass under her hooves seems shinier. She moves and there's a flash. You squint. Another hoofprint. Another glint. Did you see that? you ask. Apollo frowns. See what? The ground. Its weight. Look, the cow steps again. Where her hoof touched the earth, there's a faint shimmer. You kneel. It's not just sunlight. It's metal. Soft. Yellow. You brush the dirt aside. Gold. Why, you whisper, is that cow leaving gold? Apollo tilts his head. I may have sung to her too much, and just like that, the world is about to get a whole lot more complicated. But that's for tomorrow. Tonight, the stars are out, the cows are calm, and Apollo has fallen asleep with Hermia curled beside him like a divine pillow. The only sound is the soft rustle of wind in the barley and the faint tinkle of his lyre strings swaying gently on the fence post. You smile, stretch out on the grass, and feel sleep drift closer. You wake up to the sound of coins, not jingling exactly, more like a soft clinking, like someone shaking a pouch very politely in the distance. Except there's no one around. Just you, a very shiny cow, and Apollo, who is currently arguing with a butterfly. She was circling me, he insists. That clearly means something. You nod, not because you agree, but because you're still thinking about last night's golden footprints. And sure enough, when Hermia the cow saunters past, her hooves press into the earth with a muffled ching, and there it is again, a soft glint in the morning light. Gold. Real gold. Apollo walks over, frowning at the shimmering soil. She's doing that again? Yup. Didn't touch Midas, did she? Nope. He crouches beside the hoofprint and pokes it. A coin, round, perfectly smooth, and unmistakably stamped with a stylized image of a lyre, pops up like it's been freshly minted by the earth itself. You both stare at it. She's laying drachmas, Apollo says blankly. I've enchanted the cow into laying money. Hermia, oblivious, tries to eat your sandal. There are many things a sensible person might do in this situation. Notify the king, summon a priest, consult the oracle of Delphi. Apollo, naturally, chooses option D, shrug, pick up the coin, and toss it into a nearby jar like he's been doing this all his life. You tilt your head. So, do all the cows do this now? No, he says, just her. And maybe that one. And, oh dear, you follow his gaze. The entire herd is shimmering. Subtle, just a flicker here, a glint there, but unmistakable. One by one, each cow is casually planting small patches of treasure with every sleepy step. The fields have become a divine piggy bank. You take a deep breath and say what you're both thinking. We should definitely not tell anyone. Apollo nods so fast you're surprised his laurel wreath doesn't fall off. But keeping secrets in a village of nosy shepherds is like trying to hide a thunderstorm behind a curtain. Word gets out. It starts innocently enough. A little boy notices a golden pebble in a hoof trail. A milkmaid's bucket grows mysteriously heavy. Then a merchant stumbles upon an entire glittering footprint and starts weeping with joy. Within days, the valley is buzzing with rumors. Aphrodite bathed in the stream. No, it's dragon treasure. Maybe the cows ate Midas. A delegation arrives from the next town over requesting a viewing of the miraculous livestock. Apollo throws a cloak over Hermia's back and claims she's just exceptionally clean. It doesn't work. The visitors leave in a state of mild religious awe, and one of them definitely stole a hoofprint. Meanwhile, the local economy is beginning to shift. Bakery prices triple. Cobbler wages mysteriously quintuple. One shepherd starts charging for blessed hay. Another offers hoofprint tours. And someone, possibly Apollo, starts selling cow-themed talismans made out of tree bark and optimism. Historians still argue whether this was Thessaly's first inflation crisis or a divine prank taken too far. You and Apollo huddle near the stream, whispering about what to do. We could leave, you suggest, and let these people worship my cow as an oracle? I mean, they are bringing her baskets of figs. Hermia, chewing serenely, accepts a flower crown from a passing child. She's loving this. Apollo sighs. I didn't mean to turn her into a golden goose. Cow, whatever. Point is, this was supposed to be simple exile. It's true. You were meant to keep a low profile. Instead, there's now a gold-huffing herd, a minor cult forming, and oh yes, a group of very confused tax officials approaching with a clipboard and a scroll longer than your arm. The lead official adjusts his spectacles. We need to inspect your livestock. Apollo throws a blanket over Hermia's back and gestures dramatically. She's sleeping. She's mooing. In her sleep, you cough and step in. Maybe you'd like some cheese? It works momentarily. But the writing's on the wall. Or rather, in the dirt. Written in glimmering cow prints and occasionally chewed by curious goats. That night, under the olive tree, you and Apollo come to a decision. Tomorrow, he says, we put the herd on a mountain. You blink. You want to move all the cows to the mountain? They need peace. They need containment. Same thing. So, the next morning, you both wake up at dawn. Whisper to the cows like it's a secret mission. and start herding them toward the misty slopes of Mount Othrys. It's not easy. One cow, Lyrica, refuses to walk uphill without a musical accompaniment. Another panics at the sight of a butterfly. Hermia simply lies down halfway up and demands cuddles. But you make it, eventually, and once the cows settle in, something strange happens. The gold stops. No more glittering hoofprints. No more accidental minting. It's as if the mountain, colder and quieter than the valley below, has absorbed the enchantment. Apollo pokes the ground beside Hermia's hoof. Nothing, he says, sounding equal parts relieved and disappointed. You exhale. Maybe it was just a phase, like lyre solos during dinner, or dating mortals. Apollo rolls his eyes. I only did that twice. Which time caused the plague? Moving on. You both watch as the cows graze peacefully in the silver morning light. The only thing shimmering now is the dew on their backs and the occasional overpolished stone. No more chaos. No more coins. Just peace. And for once, you almost believe it might last. Peace, of course, is a relative term. Because just as you start to relax, feet up, sipping herbal goat's milk tea brewed in a cracked amphora, you hear the unmistakable sound of poetry. Bad poetry. Drifting up from the valley below comes a voice trying very hard to rhyme moonlight with cheese blight and failing spectacularly. You glance at Apollo, who's pretending not to notice. Don't say it, he mutters, eyes fixed on a distant sheep. You say it anyway. Is that another bard? Apollo groans. It's worse. That's Hyacinthus. You blink. The one from Sparta? He nods grimly. Yes. Spartan prince. Pretty. Fond of limericks. Once tried to invent interpretive pottery. Oh dear. And sure enough, climbing the mountain trail with the dramatic flair of someone who has never once carried a water jug in his life comes Hyacinthus, cloaked, perfumed, and radiating smug romantic ambition. He spots Apollo immediately and beams. There you are. I've been wandering for days, writing odes in your honor. Listen to this one. No, Apollo says, gently but firmly, but it's too late. Hyacinthus launches into verse involving divine utters and something uncomfortably metaphoric about streams of gold. The cows look deeply offended. You trying not to inhale your tea, cough. Why is he here? Apollo mutters under his breath. I might have told him I was being exiled to a lonely place full of longing. Apparently he translated that as romantic mountain date with cows. The thing about Hyacinthus is that he doesn't take hints, or warnings, or direct requests to please stop reciting things about lactation. Instead, he sets up camp right beside yours, spreads out scented cushions, and begins what he calls a sonnet vigil. You ask Apollo, do you want me to push him down the hill? Tempting. But no. He bruises easily, so you try to ignore it. But things get complicated when Hyacinthus begins giving the cows names. Oh look, he sighs dreamily. This one's clearly a Sappho. She has the eyes of a tragic poet. That's Hermia, you correct. Sappho Hermia, he decides. A fusion of elegance. He gifts her a garland of woven violets. She sneezes on him. Later, over fire-roasted figs and toasted barley cakes, you and Apollo plot your next move. We have to redirect him, you say? Apollo, staring gloomily into the fire, nods. Maybe I pretend to fall in love with a tree, or a bear, or you. You raise an eyebrow. We're not doing that again. Fair enough. So you try Plan B, distraction via festival. It's a classic trick, beloved by bored Olympians and desperate mortals alike. Just invent a local celebration and hope everyone gets too caught up in ribbon dancing to ask questions. You and Apollo spend the next 2 days carving rustic instruments, stringing olive branches into crowns, and encouraging the cows to practice synchronized mooing. Hyacinthus, predictably, loves it. This is divine, he cries, spinning in a tunic that is somehow both sheer and embroidered with cows. You call it the Festival of Hoof and Harmony. Locals wander up from the valley, drawn by rumors of divine music and possible cheese giveaways. There's lyre music, goat races, and a surprisingly competitive event called Guess That Cowprint. Apollo plays a solo. You fry honey cakes. Hermia wins best moo. Historians still argue whether this event qualifies as the first bovine-themed cult gathering in ancient Greece. Some claim it's apocryphal. Others insist they've found shards of pottery featuring distinctly cow-shaped deities wearing laurels. Either way, it works, for a while, because when the sun sets and the fire dies down, Hyacinthus sits too close to Apollo and whispers, I wish we could stay here forever. Apollo shifts uncomfortably. Forever's a very long time. And that's when you see it, the look. It's a mix of heartache and poetry and entirely too much scented oil. It means Hyacinthus is about to compose something devastating. You brace yourself. Sure enough, at dawn, he announces a grand gesture. He will build a shrine. To the cows, to Apollo, to love itself. And it will be shaped like a lyre. You close your eyes. We need a better plan. Apollo agrees. We need work. Like manual labor? Exactly. Something so exhausting no one will have energy for sonnets. So you descend the mountain the next day in search of a task humble enough for a god, yet tedious enough to repel poetic suitors. And that's how you find yourselves volunteering to rebuild the local granary. Hyacinthus, too confused by the smell of wet barley, stays behind. You spend the next few weeks stacking grain sacks, hammering thatch, and occasionally arguing with mice. Apollo, surprisingly handy with a mallet, gains a bit of respect among the townsfolk. One even calls him that quiet guy with the nice arms. You nearly drop a barrel laughing. And just like that, things settle again. No gold cows. No cults. No love-struck princes weaving cow haikus. Just you, Apollo, and a granary slowly rising from the dust. Until, of course, the snakes show up. But that's for tomorrow. It starts with a hiss. A long, slow, sibilant sigh that slithers through the morning stillness like a particularly judgmental breeze. You blink awake under your half-stitched granary tarp and wonder if someone's boiling tea again, only to realize the sound is much closer to the ground, and also moving. You sit up slowly, carefully, and see it, a snake, pale green and long as your arm, coiled neatly atop the bag of barley you stacked just yesterday. It flicks its tongue at you like it's evaluating your worth as breakfast. You freeze. Apollo doesn't. He's behind you in seconds, holding a garden hoe like a lyre of destruction. No sudden movements, he murmurs, eyes locked on the snake. Wasn't planning on it. Then more hissing. Multiple hisses. You both turn in unison to see a second serpent slithering under the grain sacks, then a third descending from the roof beam, and a fourth perched rather smugly atop the granary's half-finished arch like it owns the place. You stare. Are we being judged by a snake committee? Apollo nods grimly. Looks like a divine infestation. Could be local snakes. He snorts. Those are temple vipers. They only show up when oracles go weird. You pause. Define go weird. Apollo sighs. Dreams. Prophecies. Sometimes unnatural yogurt curdling. Sure enough, the village elder stumbles toward you, wrapped in 3 shawls and confusion. I had a dream last night, she says. A cow whispered numbers to me. Apollo pinches the bridge of his nose. Oh no. Then I sneezed up a gold coin, she adds helpfully. You look at Apollo. We didn't bless the grain, did we? Not on purpose. He explains that sometimes divine energy leaks, especially if, say, one has been radiating solar blessings near open produce. It seeps into the barley, the water, the butter, and apparently the rodents. The mice, now unusually plump and oddly musical, begin chirping in pentatonic scales. One of them hits a perfect E-flat. Okay, you say. Now it's weird. Historians still debate whether this event marks the origin of the so-called Oracle of Grain and Fur, a briefly celebrated rural prophecy cult in which elderly women translated the chirps of fat mice into weather predictions. The records are sketchy, but one scroll insists that a mouse named Leonidas correctly predicted a thunderstorm and 2 pregnancies. Either way, the snakes aren't leaving. They're guardians now, Apollo says flatly. Of what? He gestures. The granary. Sure enough, the serpents now bask in the sun atop the grain sacks like smug librarians. They bite no one, but they stare, long, slow, soul-piercing stares that make the local children cry and the donkeys faint. We need to appease them, you suggest. With what? Scented incense and interpretive dance. You shrug. Mice? He actually considers it. So you devise a plan, make the granary an official temple, but the kind of temple no one wants to visit. You hang a sign, Shrine of Agricultural Mystery. Donations accepted. No refunds. Apollo composes a deeply confusing hymn about wheat spirits. You choreograph a ritual that involves waving rakes in a circle while chanting yeast, yeast, rise in peace. Hyacinthus returns halfway through a rehearsal and, to his credit, only blinks twice before helping arrange votive loaves. I see your aesthetic has evolved, he says. It's rustic, Apollo replies, and reptilian. It works. Sort of. People bring offerings. Chickpeas. Flower garlands. A suspicious number of potatoes. Some believe the snakes offer fertility, others think they're cursed tax collectors. No one is quite sure, and Apollo refuses to clarify. Meanwhile, the snakes continue lounging. One of them adopts a barrel as a throne. Another develops an affinity for Apollo's sandals and curls around his ankle like a bracelet. You name it Socrates. Things settle again. Sort of, except for the dreams. Apollo starts waking in the night, mumbling about floods and flaming chariots. You start having visions of cows tap dancing on mountaintops. The elder reports a vision of Hyacinthus winning a wrestling match against a loaf of bread. Do you think it means anything? You ask Apollo one morning. He looks haunted. I think I miss being bad at herding, but the weirdness keeps building. The snakes now glow faintly under moonlight. The granary hums. The barley tastes like figs. Travelers stop by asking for visions. One even claims the wheat cured his hiccups. You and Apollo hold an emergency council at dawn, surrounded by cows, mice, and at least 3 snakes doing synchronized stretches. I think the cows are divine again, you say. I think I'm divine again, Apollo admits. You both look at Hermia, who is chewing contentedly on a scroll someone left as an offering. We should probably leave, you say. Apollo nods. Before the mice demand vestments. So once again, you pack, but not with urgency. This time it's a gentle farewell. The cows are healthy. The snakes seem content. The mice chirp a lullaby as you roll your things into sacks. Hyacinthus waves goodbye from a hammock made of wheat stalks. Apollo leaves a single gold flake behind, tucked beneath Socrates' tail. And with that you head north, away from temples, visions, and the lingering smell of divine cheese. You walk, and walk, and walk. The dust changes color every few miles from red to gold to something distressingly like eggplant, and the cows don't complain, which is perhaps the most miraculous sign of all. Apollo seems lighter now. Not cheerful exactly, but less tightly coiled. His hair still glows faintly when he sneezes, but he hasn't accidentally set anything on fire in days. That's progress. You think we'll find normal work this time? You ask one afternoon, as you both chew on figs and gaze at a distant village shimmering on the horizon. Define normal, he replies, mouthful. No visions. No mice choirs. No snakes with opinions. He swallows. Unlikely. But one can dream. The village, it turns out, is known for 2 things, olives and bureaucracy. The olives are excellent. The bureaucracy is less edible. Still, you're hopeful. A new start. A chance to reinvent yourselves as simple workers, no glowing halos, no celestial cattle. Maybe Apollo could take up sculpture? But fate, as always, has other plans. You are barely 3 days into your stay when you hear about it. The lost flock. Not cows this time. Not even goats. Sheep, dozens of them. Gone. Vanished like socks from a dryer. The village elder, who looks like he's been made entirely out of parchment and passive aggression, explains the situation. The shepherd took a nap under a fig tree and awoke to find the hillside empty. Classic fig tree trap, Apollo mutters. You are both promptly hired as temporary divine shepherd recovery consultants. It sounds fancy. It mostly means wandering around whistling and yelling names like Flufficus and William, but you get lucky. After half a day of tracking oddly rhythmic hoofprints, you stumble across the sheep. They're fine. A little dusty. Standing in a neat circle in the middle of a grove, swaying gently from side to side like they're at a silent disco. Apollo squints. They're meditating. You raise an eyebrow. That's not a thing sheep do. He nods, serious. Not usually. Unless someone's been singing near them. Sure enough, a flute lies on the grass nearby. And perched on a rock beside it, Hermes, wearing sunglasses and eating grapes. Miss me? He grins. You groan. You again. Apollo sighs. You taught the sheep to vibe? Hermes shrugs. They needed purpose. It's hard to argue with that. The sheep do seem weirdly peaceful. Even the lambs are sitting in lotus position, which is physically improbable. Hermes explains that he's been experimenting with pastoral transcendence. Says it might be the future of agriculture. Also says the sheep have stopped chewing holes in the village laundry since he started curating their energy. Apollo tries very hard not to strangle him with a grapevine. Meanwhile, the village, seeing its sheep blissfully still and no longer escaping fences, decides this is excellent news. You and Apollo are immediately promoted to full-time sheep caretakers. Again, you are officially back to herding. Except now, your job description includes spiritual guidance and occasional pan-flute therapy. Historians still argue whether this short-lived meditative flock movement had any real influence on Greek agricultural practice. One tablet claims it reduced wool shedding. Another simply says, do not feed the sheep figs after sunset. Things start off easy. The sheep are chill. You guide them to new pastures. Apollo hums lullabies. Occasionally, Hermes pops in to teach the sheep deep breathing exercises. You begin to relax. That is your first mistake, because then the olive oil incident happens. It begins innocently. One of the sheep bumps into a low-hanging jar outside a market stall. It topples. Cracks. Oil everywhere. A second sheep slips. A third tries to lick the spill. Soon, the entire flock is sliding around like woolly figure skaters. You try to control the chaos, but Apollo's laughing too hard to help. One particularly nimble ewe somehow launches herself into a barrel and emerges looking like a greasy throw pillow. The villagers are not pleased, especially when someone points out that the sheep, now soaked in high-grade olive oil, are technically more valuable than before. Artisanal Hermes offers helpfully. Organic sheep all cured. You are fined 3 amphorae. The sheep become local celebrities. People come from nearby towns to see the olive slick mystics of the grove. Someone starts charging for portraits. A man in a toga tries to sell you a sponsorship deal for an herbal shampoo. You do not have the strength to say no. Apollo, for his part, seems amused. At least we haven't cursed anything. You both pause, then turn slowly to see a group of children offering fig tarts to one particularly oily ram who glows faintly in the setting sun. Never mind, Apollo mutters. It's happening again. The sheep begin humming. Not just bleating, not by and G, but actual harmonic humming. You try not to panic. This isn't like the mice thing, right? Hermes whistles. The sheep harmonize in C major. You panic a little. The elder is called. He performs a ritual of clarification, which involves poking the sheep with a fennel stick and declaring them aggressively enigmatic. By week's end, a new oracle is erected. The Temple of Oleopastoral Enlightenment. You hand in your resignation, which consists of a napkin that says, "No more glowing animals, please." Apollo signs it with a doodle of a sheep in sunglasses. Once again, you pack. Once again, the cows, who have followed you for some reason, moo their judgment. And once again, you trudge off into the uncertain distance, hoping naively that this time, things will be different. It's barely dawn when you and Apollo reach the edge of another nameless hill town, small, sun-warmed, and suspiciously quiet, as though the birds are on strike and the cicadas have unionized. You pause to sniff the air. Is that vinegar? Apollo sniffs too. Pickles. You look at him. He shrugs. A lot of experience with mortal snacks. It's a long story involving Dionysus and fermented cucumbers. You decide not to press. As you step into the town square, a hand-painted sign greets you in wobbly letters, "Home of the legendary pickle of prophecy." You stop. Apollo stares. A cow coughs in disbelief behind you. The only open stall belongs to an old woman stirring a barrel of brine with a ladle roughly the size of a trident. Her hair is white, her eyes sharper than obsidian, and her voice is a perfect blend of grandma and low-key threat. "You look like 2 weary souls in need of purpose," she croons. "I'm actually more in need of a nap," you mumble. "Do you take interns?" Apollo asks. Within the hour, you are hired as assistant briners. The job involves cutting cucumbers, chanting under your breath, and not asking why the barrels occasionally whisper back. Apollo seems weirdly at peace here. He hums while slicing dill. He even makes friends with a particularly sarcastic cat named Speckle. You, meanwhile, try to avoid the barrel labeled "Do not feed after midnight." You begin to think you've finally found peace. But this, naturally, is where things begin to ferment, literally and metaphorically. Because the townspeople truly believe that one pickle, just one, and they never say which, grants brief visions of the future to anyone who eats it. And they are absolutely obsessed with figuring out which one. Every evening, there's a pickle revelation ceremony. People take turns sampling pickles and dramatically declaring things like, "I shall meet a goat in the next full moon. Beware the man with 7 sandals. The gods want me to open a honey candle boutique." Apollo watches from the sidelines with the tired air of someone who's seen real prophecies and just wants to be left alone with his cucumber slices. But one night, inevitably, someone makes a declaration that hits a little too close. A young woman bites into her pickle, eyes go wide, and she says clearly, "The sun shall lose his way again." Everyone freezes. Slowly, the crowd turns toward Apollo. He groans. Not this again. The whispers start. Rumors spread. A divine figure, fallen from power, now slicing pickles with mortals. The sun himself demoted to deli work. The townspeople grow weird. Not hostile, just worshipful. They begin offering jars of artisan brine at his feet. A child draws his face on a cucumber and names it Minialo. You think about running, but then things take a turn for the utterly bizarre. Because the pickles actually start working. Not every time, but now and then, someone takes a bite and gets something right. A woman dreams of rain, there's a sudden downpour. A boy says, "The cat will lead me to treasure," and the next morning, Speckle deposits a shiny button in his bed. Someone eats a whole pickle and begins speaking fluent Phoenician. Apollo is rattled. "That's not possible. That's my department." You nod. Could be just coincidence. Coincidence doesn't taste like garlic and coriander. Hermes arrives the next day holding a sandwich. Your pickles are hauntingly complex, he says through a full mouth. Also, I may have spiked the brine. You stare. With what? He counts on his fingers. Ambrosia. A single tear from a muse. 3 drops of chaos water. And a sprig of mint for freshness. You put your face in your hands. Apollo squints. You made psychoprophetic pickles. Hermes beams. I call them provision pickles. You decide, firmly and without hesitation, that you want to go home. But there's no going back. Not yet, because that night the villagers hold a full-on festival. There are banners. Speeches. Someone composes a hymn. A man dressed as a giant pickle dances on stilts. The temple of the tangy oracle is unveiled, complete with jars set into the walls and a sacred ladle on display. Apollo sighs deeply. Do you ever get the feeling the world is not improving? You nod, passing him a cup of cold brine. Daily, historians still argue whether this was a one-off mass delusion or a genuine brush with divine fermentation. The only surviving record is a mural showing a man in glowing robes being serenaded by a choir of cucumbers. But for you, the final straw is what they ask next. They want you and Apollo to bless the pickles. In public, while wearing ceremonial aprons, Apollo draws the line. I am the god of light, music, and clarity, not relish. Hermes starts designing apron logos anyway. You pack again. This time, you leave a thank you note and a bottle of vinegar behind. Speckle gives you one last judging stare before curling up on a warm jar. As you trudge back into the hills, Apollo mutters, I never want to smell brine again. You nod. We need something simple next. No magic. No glowing food. No prophetic vegetables. The cows follow you in silence. Behind you somewhere, the pickle choir begins its nightly chant. You're not even halfway to wherever you're going when you spot it. A ribbon of dust curling up from the next valley, followed by the unmistakable creak of wooden wheels and the off-key honking of a horn made from, is that a ram's horn? Apollo squints. That's either a wedding parade or a traveling philosopher. Either way, we're doomed. It's neither. It's a mobile theater troupe. You know this because the wagon is covered in peeling paint that reads, The Thespian Tortoise Presents, The Ballad of the Bronze Beard. A small man with a feathered hat leaps out and bows. You there. You look vaguely unemployed. Can you act? Apollo, eyes wide, immediately denies any association with the dramatic arts. Absolutely not. I prefer static beauty. The troupe, however, is desperate. You are, within the hour, both hired. Apollo as a sun-charming chorus extra and you somehow as the backup tortoise wrangler. There is no main tortoise wrangler. It's a trap. Still, the gig pays in bread, olives, and the occasional coin. And for the first few days, it's almost fun. You travel from village to village. The lead actor insists on being addressed as Master Posidramas. The play changes nightly depending on audience feedback and whether the goat has eaten the scrolls again. The script, if you can call it that, is a fever dream of history and myth. Scene 1. A Spartan blacksmith sings a love ballad to a bronze statue. Scene 2. Zeus shows up disguised as a sock. Scene 3. A tortoise delivers a monologue on the futility of sandals. And yet audiences love it. People throw flowers. Children beg for autographs. A priest declares the tortoise the chosen one. Even Apollo starts to enjoy it. He hums his own dramatic themes. He suggests better lighting. He creates a sunbeam spotlight for the lead actor's big moment. But of course, nothing golden stays. Because one evening, just before the performance in a very important town, Master Posidramas sprains his ankle doing emotional lunges, and the show must go on. So naturally, they cast Apollo as the lead. Now, if you've ever seen a god forced into amateur community theater, you know it's both dazzling and deeply cursed. Apollo has presence. He's luminous. He remembers every line after reading it once. He also cannot stop making improvements. Why would the blacksmith weep here? He asks. Wouldn't he recite a radiant sonnet about fire and longing? You try to stop him, but it's too late. He rewrites half the third act. That night, the audience is stunned. They are not used to iambic hexameter, holographic lighting, or impromptu harp solos. A few cry. One faints. 2 declare religious conversions. Apollo takes a bow and declares it a humble experiment in mortal catharsis. Backstage, the rest of the troupe mutinies. You stole the spotlight, cries one actor. I was supposed to have a line. The tortoise bites him. Apollo shrugs. Art evolves. You are voted most neutral party and asked to mediate. It does not go well. The troupe fractures. Half want to follow Apollo and form a divine drama collective. The others want to return to their roots, simple, tortoise-based storytelling. In the confusion, you and Apollo slip away, but not before the tortoise, newly rebranded as the Oracle of Shellos, is carried off by a crowd of enthusiastic followers. You whisper, "We really can't go anywhere without causing at least one minor cult." Apollo just looks smug. "Well, I am inspiration incarnate." You consider throwing a sandal at him. Historians still debate whether this brief surge in traveling shell theater was divine influence or just peak Bronze Age whimsy. Some argue that the emergence of amphitheater design across certain villages owes more to this moment than to classical Greek architecture. Others just point to the tortoise's shrine, yes, it's real, and shrug. You, however, remember the chaos. The hastily built stage collapsing under too much divine radiance. The actor trying to improvise dialogue with a cow, and the moment Apollo, standing in the rain, softly said, "Maybe I should just open a vineyard." Now you walk the next dusty trail in silence, wondering what the gods did for peace before tea was invented. A soft breeze stirs the olive branches. Apollo walks beside you, uncharacteristically quiet. You wait. Finally, he says, "Next time, you're playing the blacksmith." The thing about traveling with a former sun god is that the bar for ordinary gets permanently raised. So when you wander into a valley littered with glinting, half-buried metal objects and Apollo casually murmurs, "Ah yes, this must be where Hephaestus dumped his prototypes," you don't even blink. You just sigh and start checking for scorpions. The landscape is half junkyard, half museum exhibit. Bent bronze limbs, shattered gear systems, a disemboweled lion automaton twitching every few minutes as if trying to remember how to roar. Apollo pokes it with a stick, still more expressive than Aeschylus. This place isn't marked on any map, which is saying something because even your most questionable scroll, the one illustrated entirely with fish, makes no mention of a mechanical scrapyard nestled between two sleepy goat villages. Still, you and Apollo settle in for the night. You roast some barley cakes over a gear-shaped fire pit and watch the stars. For a moment, things feel calm. Then, at precisely the worst possible hour, the owl wakes up. To clarify, not a real owl. A bronze owl, fully life-sized, eyes glowing like embers, flaps out of a tree with a screech that sounds like a trumpet learning to cry. Apollo frowns. Bubo Model 3.0? Not his finest work. The owl lands with a thud beside your fire, shakes off a few cobwebs, and starts reciting what sounds like a user manual. In case of divine emergency, it says, "Please activate auxiliary protocol. Cow Protocol Beta 9. You and Apollo exchange a look. "We're not touching anything labeled Beta 9, you say. Apollo nods. Learned that the hard way on Delos. But the owl is persistent. It waddles up, fixes you with its glowing eyes, and chirps, "Urgent. Bovine reallocation sequence incomplete. Please locate herd." And that's when it clicks. This isn't a junkyard, it's the lost automation lab where Apollo tried to build the first self-herding cowbots. The project, according to some fragmentary temple graffiti, failed due to excessive mowing. Historians still argue whether this lab was a myth or a misunderstood weather station. You, standing ankle-deep in what might be a self-basting cauldron, have strong opinions. Apollo grimaces. "I was trying to automate agriculture. Mortals were getting distracted. Inventing philosophy. Falling into wells. You're not sure cow droids would have helped. Still, curiosity gets the better of both of you. You follow the owl through a narrow pass, over a rocky ridge, and into what looks like an ancient cow corral, except it's empty, or nearly empty. In the center stands a single cow, or rather a sort of cow. It's gleaming, bronze-plated, with wheels instead of hooves. It blinks slowly, then emits a low, sorrowful moo like a lute being sat on. Apollo coughs into his fist. "Well, that answers the question of where my smart herd went." The owl does a celebratory spin. "Unit 001 located. Please initiate reactivation protocol." Before you can stop him, Apollo steps forward and presses a sun-shaped button behind the cow's ear. Immediately, the cow begins to glow. Also, you step back. The air fills with mechanical whirring, distant hoofbeat sounds you think they're pre-recorded, and a faint scent of burnt hay. Apollo, ever proud, leans in. Behold, the future of pastoral life. And then the cow explodes. Not violently, just dramatically. Panels pop open, gears shoot into the bushes, and the cow emits a final, tragic moo before collapsing sideways like a deflated bagpipe. A long silence follows. The owl clicks sadly. "Unit 001 terminated." Apollo nods, stoic. "Well, that went about as well as last time." You dust off your tunic and mutter, "Maybe mortals are better at the cow thing." The rest of the night is quiet. The owl powers down with a final beep. You and Apollo sit beside the smoldering remnants of the world's first robotic cow, watching the stars fade into dawn. There's a weird comfort in the failure. A soft, almost human truth buried beneath all the bronze and bravado. Even gods can't automate everything. The project never made it into the myths. Most scribes skipped it, choosing instead to focus on Apollo's lyre playing or his love life or that one time he tried to start a plague. But here, in this forgotten lab, you witness something better than legend, a god trying and failing to make chores easier. You pat him on the back. He scowls. Don't be sentimental. It was just a cow. Still, as you leave, you notice him glance back. Just once, the busted all creaks in the breeze. Somewhere nearby, a gear finally gives up and rolls downhill with a sound like a contented sigh. By now, you've accepted that Apollo's cow-herding phase involved equal parts ambition, disaster, and unexplained mooing. But just when you think you've seen the weirdest parts of his pastoral resume, he casually mentions, "Oh, I also did a brief stint in cattle divination." You stop walking. "You mean telling the future from cows?" He shrugs. "Not the whole cow. Just the way they chewed." You stare. He elaborates. "The ancients were very into reading signs. Birds, smoke, entrails. I figured cows were underutilized." A pause. "Didn't catch on?" Unsurprising. Still, because you're traveling with Apollo, the god who once tried to invent solar-powered sandals didn't store well, you now find yourself at an abandoned oracle site nestled in the Arcadian hills. It's overgrown, forgotten, and smells faintly of thyme and whatever herb goats like to nap on. According to Apollo, this was once his experimental bovino-mantic retreat, a place where he'd observe cows for omens. "You can tell a lot from cud rhythm," he says seriously. "But humans lack patience." You can't argue. Watching a cow chew grass for 45 minutes does not scream prophetic insight. Unless you're very bored. Or immortal. Still, the place has charm. The small stone amphitheater is carved with symbols, half constellations, half cows. At the center stands a cracked marble platform with the faint inscription, "He who chews knows." Apollo winces. "Marketing wasn't my strong suit. The ritual," he explains, "was simple: offer barley mash, wait for the sacred cow to choose a direction to face while chewing, and interpret that as a sign from the gods." North meant fortune. South meant caution. East meant romance. West meant goats. Always goats. Historians still argue whether this practice was ever real, or simply a metaphorical interpretation of the horned oracle mentioned in 2 fragmentary scrolls found near Thebes. You now know it was both real and deeply silly. You sit on a mossy bench while Apollo reminisces about his clients. One shepherd apparently received a prophecy that his sheep would fall in love. Turned out to be a metaphor for fleece quality, Apollo mutters. "He still sent me cheese annually." At this point, a very old cow wanders into the clearing. She's plodding, a bit cross-eyed, and emits a phlegmy moo that echoes off the rocks like a tired ghost. Apollo lights up. "Calliope!" You blink. "You named the oracle cow?" She was more consistent than most mortals. Calliope blinks at you. She's missing a horn, possibly gained a few moss colonies, and absolutely radiates the energy of someone who has witnessed too much. Apollo kneels, offers her some barley, and waits. Calliope chews. Slowly, rhythmically, staring directly at you. Apollo beams. "West." You nod. "Let me guess. Goats?" He sighs. "It's always goats." You sit for a while, watching the sun move across the sky. There's something oddly peaceful about being in a forgotten oracle pasture beside a geriatric cow and a disgraced sun god. As the day warms, Apollo sketches a little diagram in the dirt with a stick. It's part cow, part astrological chart, part something he calls ruminant calculus. You're 80% sure it's nonsense. Still, he seems happy. Not heroic happy, not giant python defeated happy. Just quietly content in a way that makes you feel like this was the real one all along. "I tried to teach humans how to listen," he says, eyes softening. "But they were always talking, praying, complaining. No one just listened to the cow." He pats Calliope on her sun-warmed hide. She flicks her tail in response and chews slightly louder, as if delivering a message in Morse code only Apollo can decipher. That night, you camp in the old amphitheater. The stones still hum faintly with decades of misguided prophecy. A soft wind carries the scent of lavender and distant, judgy sheep. Apollo plays a few notes on his lyre. Not a song, just something melodic, simple. Maybe a lullaby. Maybe a thank you. Calliope snores beside you, her breath slow and steady, like a rhythm you didn't know you needed. The stars rise. A fox barks in the distance. You think of all the seekers who once stood here, desperate for answers, watching a cow blink at the horizon. And now you understand the appeal. It's not about the prediction. It's the pause, the quiet, the invitation to sit still long enough to realize that maybe, just maybe, the universe is chewing alongside you. Pasture is somehow even quieter than night. The sky has just started to brighten, painting the horizon with sleepy streaks of gold and violet. Dew clings to the moss-covered stones. Calliope, ever majestic in her bovine ancientness, lumbers toward a sun-dappled patch of grass and resumes chewing without fanfare. No ceremony, no celestial chorus, just the world's most retired prophet doing what she does best. You stretch, unsure whether sleeping on a slab of sacred limestone was good for your back, but you're surprisingly at ease. Beside you, Apollo is already awake, fiddling with what looks like a homemade sundial fashioned from a broken lyre string and 3 goat bones. You're inventing something again, you murmur. Improving, he corrects. It's a directional timepiece. Tells you when and where to nap. So, a compass for laziness? Exactly. He beams. You finally get it. After a simple breakfast of figs, leftover barley mash, and exactly 1 mysteriously warm grape, Apollo announces that it's time to move on. I've heard of a town where the cows paint. We should investigate. You don't ask. At this point, you know better. As you walk, he tells you more about his years as an unofficial cowherd/wandering musician/occasional cartographer. I once tried to map the constellations based on how cows laid in a field, he says. The cow zodiac didn't take off. To your astonishment, he pulls a crumpled piece of parchment from a pocket. It's covered in ink blot-like doodles that vaguely resemble cows arranged in starry patterns. Historians still argue whether this is the origin of the southern herd, he says proudly. You raise an eyebrow. There's no southern herd. There could be, he insists. You arrive at a small village nestled between 2 rolling hills. It's charming in the way forgotten places are quiet, sun-baked, and filled with chickens that refuse to acknowledge traffic laws. Apollo seems to know every cobblestone. This is where I tried the apprenticeship thing, he says, leading you past a well and toward a weathered barn. Inside, the air is thick with hay and nostalgia. The walls are covered in paintings. Not just rustic brushstrokes, but what appears to be genuine artwork created somehow by cattle. Hoofprints in paint. Smears with intention. One piece looks disturbingly like Zeus. A thin, sprightly woman appears from the shadows. Apollo? She says, peering over her spectacles. Back to reclaim your art school? Apollo shrugs sheepishly. Just visiting. Still owe me for the purple dye incident, she says, but her smile is fond. You learn that during one of his more experimental phases, Apollo decided cows might benefit from artistic expression. He set up a barn, some canvases, a lot of berry-based paint, and very few rules. The results were avant-garde. Some of the paintings are still here. One shows a cow licking a canvas into abstract swirls. Another appears to depict a thunderstorm entirely from the perspective of a haystack. There's even a piece called Self-Mutrate. Historians would have a field day here. Some argue that animal-assisted artistry had roots in ancient rituals, others claim Apollo just got bored. Either way, it was a brief but glorious moment in agricultural aestheticism. Apollo gestures toward one large canvas that's been preserved behind glass. This one, he says reverently, was made entirely with tail flicks. It's actually kind of beautiful. Deep streaks of indigo and ochre, layered like wind over a field. You tilt your head, then blink. Did it just wink at you? Probably not. But still, outside, the village is hosting its weekly market. Apollo waves at several vendors. One sells only cheeses shaped like mythological monsters. Try the Cerberus triple cream, he advises. Another offers dried herbs labeled For Good Dreams, Mild Regret, and Sudden Poetry. You buy some of the poetry blend. Can't hurt. As the sun climbs, Apollo tells you about a farmer here named Giannis who once asked for help with a cow that refused to moo. I tried to explain that some cows are just introverted, Apollo says. He didn't believe me, so Apollo sang to it. Not just a casual tune, but a full-on lullaby to coax out its voice. Eventually it mooed in harmony, he says proudly. Still my best duet. You pass the field where it happened. The cow, probably not the same one, is chewing calmly. Apollo sings a single note as you walk by. The cow flicks its tail in rhythm. Coincidence? Maybe. Magic? Probably not. But charming? Absolutely. You end the day by the stream, feet in the cool water. Apollo skips stones expertly, each one landing with a perfect plop that echoes like punctuation in a lazy sentence. There's something restful about not being important, he admits. You glance at him. I was a big deal once, he continues. Golden boy, slayer of beasts, god of the sun and prophecy and honestly too many things. But cows? Cows never asked for perfection. Just grass. Maybe a lullaby. It's the most content you've seen him. The sun dips low, casting long shadows across the field. The cows begin to settle, their shape soft and slow-moving against the darkening green. One low moo rolls across the land like a sigh. You close your eyes, listening. The stars are beginning to wake up. You wake to the gentle sound of a reed flute echoing across the pasture. Not Apollo this time, he's fast asleep, sprawled across a boulder like some kind of sun-drunk cat. The music is coming from a nearby hill where a shepherd boy plays lazily, his sheep wandering wherever they please. One of them is attempting to climb a fig tree. You sit up slowly, brush grass from your tunic and stretch your arms toward the pinkening sky. Morning here feels soft, like the world is wrapped in wool and tea steam. The cows are already stirring. One of them sneezes and startles 3 others into a slow-motion stampede that ends with everyone chewing the same patch of grass. Apollo yawns theatrically, blinking at the sky. You missed sunrise, he says. But it was probably overrated. What's the plan today? You ask, already sensing there is no plan. He scratches his chin. There's a village to the east. They say their cows speak in dreams. Speak in dreams? Only to those who nap near them. Apparently, one cow recited half a lost play of Euripides to a traveler last month. You squint. You believe that? He grins. I want to. So you set off again. The road is narrow, lined with thistles and sleepy olive groves. A donkey follows you for about an hour, then turns around of its own accord like it's seen enough. The terrain becomes hillier, and the sun begins to play its favorite trick, turning everything gold just when you're about to complain. You reach the village just before midday. It's small, mostly whitewashed stone buildings with sky-blue shutters and far too many cats. The cows here roam freely, their bells clinking like offbeat wind chimes. You ask the first villager you see about the dream-speaking cows. She nods solemnly. They're shy, though, she says. You'll need to earn their trust. Or nap a lot. Or both. Apollo takes this as a challenge. He immediately lies down in the grass and closes his eyes. You try to follow his lead but keep peeking one eye open. The cows are just watching. Not menacingly. Just judging your technique. You decide to spend the afternoon exploring instead. The village has a modest temple not to any major god but to the Lady of Forgetfulness, who supposedly helps people lose unhelpful memories. Her statue holds a sponge. You leave an offering of a particularly annoying pebble from your sandal just in case. Back by the cow field, Apollo is still asleep. A cow has settled beside him, snout near his ear. You could swear it's whispering. You blink again. Nothing. But when Apollo wakes, he sits up, dazed and inspired. I just dreamed an entire recipe for honeyed fish wrapped in fig leaves, he mutters. Also, I think one of them told me a knock-knock joke. You're not sure what to say. Over the next few days, you linger in the village. Apollo tries to commune with the cows nightly, while you document strange happenings. One cow who only naps at sunset, another that seems to respond to riddles, a third that keeps nudging you toward the same olive tree every time you pass it. You begin to suspect the olive tree is important. You ask the villagers. They just smile. Historians still argue whether the cows here were part of an old Delphic experiment, one old man says. Something about bovine divination. Didn't catch on? Apollo loves that idea. Imagine it, he says, a herd of priestly cows issuing prophecies. Instead of smoke and riddles, just intense staring and the occasional moo. One night, he decides to test it. He brings his lyre, sets it down in the center of the field, and begins to sing a lullaby he claims was once used in Elysium's rest gardens. The cows listen. Then slowly, deliberately, one of them walks forward, touches the lyre with its nose, and lets out a low, melodic moo. Apollo beams like he's won a prize. I think that means yes, he whispers. To what? To everything. You lie in the grass again, staring at the stars. Somewhere nearby, a cow sighs. I used to think power was the answer, Apollo murmurs. But maybe it's peace. Or naps. Or a perfectly ripe figure. A shooting star streaks across the sky. You close your eyes. In your dream, the cows do speak. In slow, yawning syllables, they recite strange poems about thunderberries and moonlight soup. You wake unsure whether it was real, but you taste honey in your mouth and feel oddly rested. The village farewells you the next day with baskets of fruit, bundles of herbs, and a hoofprint-stamped scroll labeled, "Mostly Accurate Prophecies." Cow edition. Apollo tucks it into his bag. Just in case we need to open a fortune-telling stall later. Where next? You ask. There's a hill, he says, where they say the cows dance when no one's watching. You sigh. Of course there is. The road beckons again, warm, dusty, and full of possibilities. You're not sure what time it is when you reach the hilltop. The sun is somewhere behind the clouds and the sky has taken on that sleepy, pewter color that makes everything feel like it's happening just after lunch or just before a nap. Apollo swears this hill is famous not for any battles or temples or kings, but because, according to scattered rumors and at least one weathered inscription, the cows here have been seen dancing. Naturally, you ask him what kind of dancing. Historians still argue whether it was a circular ritual shuffle or a spontaneous frolic. He replies with a perfectly straight face. Some say they only dance during eclipses. Others claim it happens every Thursday. It's Tuesday. You climb higher. The hill is lush and wide, surrounded by slopes of thyme, mint, and wild marjoram. The air smells like soup and bees. No cows are visible yet, but you can hear the occasional moo somewhere to the left, and then from behind you, you turn around. A lone cow stands on a low stone terrace, slowly lifting one leg and then another. It could be stretching. It could be contemplating something profound. Or it could be mid-routine. There's no way to tell. Apollo drops his pack. We wait, he announces. You spend the rest of the afternoon lounging under a fig tree, playing lazy guessing games. Would Dionysus win a dance battle? Only if his opponent had dignity and watching the clouds rehearse their big dramatic exit. Eventually, the cows emerge. First 2, then 4, then 7, all moving in that slow, synchronized way that makes you wonder whether they've been practicing behind a barn somewhere. They begin circling the terrace, hooves clicking softly on the ancient stones. Apollo gasps. You blink. It's a dance? Sort of? Imagine a waltz, but performed underwater, and also by creatures who are deeply ambivalent about effort. It's hypnotic, strange, and weirdly beautiful. You half expect someone to start singing, but it's completely silent, save for the faint crunch of hooves and the occasional distant call of a hawk overhead. You begin to feel drowsy, not from boredom, but from something deeper, something oddly serene about this moment. You lie back, letting the scene play across your half-closed eyes like an old film. Apollo leans over and whispers, "Do you feel that?" You nod. You do. It's not magic exactly, just something gentler, like the world itself exhaling. Later, in the village below, an old woman confirms it. The cows only dance when they're content, she says. And when the land remembers. You try to press her for details, but she just waves a hand. Not everything needs explaining. Apollo, of course, immediately tries to explain it anyway. It's probably residual sacred energy from the old sanctuary, he says. This whole region used to be dotted with altars, sun gods, moon gods, seasonal rites. There are layers here. But cows, you say. Even cows, he insists. Especially cows. That night, you camp at the edge of the hill. You roast root vegetables over a low fire and listen to Apollo recount a myth you've never heard before. Something about a demigod who tried to teach fish how to write poetry. It ends poorly for the fish. You both laugh. The stars are out and they seem to lean in a little closer than usual. You hear a bell in the distance, just one soft chime, and then nothing. You fall asleep wondering if the cows will dance again tomorrow. In your dream, they do. This time, they wear flower crowns. You and Apollo wake at the same time the next morning. You both look toward the terrace. Empty. No hoofprints. No music. Nothing but dew on grass and a slight breeze carrying the scent of figs and rain. Apollo shrugs. Maybe it was all a dream. Maybe, you say. Or maybe they just don't dance 2 nights in a row. You gather your things in silence, letting the quiet settle like a blanket. The road waits at the bottom of the hill, twisting lazily toward whatever comes next. Before you leave, you place a pebble on the edge of the terrace. A tiny tribute to a moment you're not sure was real, but definitely mattered. Apollo does the same. You don't speak as you walk down the hill. You just breathe the time-scented air and keep your eyes half-closed, trying to hold onto the echo of hooves. You reach the road. The wind shifts. A faint bell rings behind you. Neither of you turn around. Apollo's pace has slowed. You can tell he's stalling. Not with drama. Just that peculiar sort of ambivalence that happens when someone's nearing the end of a story they're not sure they want to finish. The road now winds into olive groves. The sun has slipped into a kind of gentle resignation, casting long shadows that shimmer and stretch like sleepy cats across the red clay path. Somewhere nearby, a cicada strikes up its scratchy lullaby. Apollo gestures vaguely ahead. There's a spring up there. Used to be sacred to Artemis. I used to sneak there when I was little. Pretend I was her. Steal her thunder. You raise an eyebrow. What? She had good taste in capes. he says deadpan. And excellent aim. The spring is, predictably, modest. A cracked stone basin surrounded by reeds and the bones of old votive offerings, tiny bronze arrows, a rusted brooch, and what appears to be a very determined goat carved from limestone. The water burbles up clear and slow, not rushing, not roaring, just being. You both sit. Apollo doesn't speak for a long time. Then he sighs. I tried, you know. Cowherding. Healing. Music. Prophecy. I even ran a vineyard once. Wait, you ran a vineyard? Briefly, he replies. The grapes unionized. You snort. He stretches out on the grass and stares at the sky. You know what nobody tells you about being a god? It's boring. Immortality just means you have too long to regret everything. You lie beside him. A breeze brushes your face like a whisper. The spring chatters softly to itself, like a friend talking in their sleep. Apollo continues. They think I got fired from the cowherding job. But really? I left. Why? The cows were smarter than me, he says, completely serious. And more content. And don't laugh, they never judged me for crying. You don't laugh. The air smells like rosemary and damp stone. A bird rustles the reeds and then flutters away, leaving only a ripple in the surface of the spring. You trace a finger through the water. It's cold, but not unfriendly. Apollo reaches into his satchel and pulls out a small, tarnished flute. Want to hear something? You nod. He plays. It's not a triumphant tune. No blaring fanfare or triumphant call to war. It's soft, wistful. A lullaby for old regrets and younger selves. Each note seems to fall directly into the soil like seeds or tears or both. You close your eyes. The melody sinks deep. Maybe it was a spring like this where he first played. Maybe that's why Artemis let him near her shrine, because she heard him and understood. Maybe he played for the cows too. The song ends. Apollo shrugs. I used to think being good at everything meant I'd finally matter. Now I think maybe I just wanted someone to sit with me by the water. You sit. The silence that follows isn't awkward, it's sacred. The kind of silence that temples try to mimic with marble and incense, but which comes naturally beside an unremarkable spring on a very average day. You both drink from the basin. The water is mineral-heavy, ancient, and slightly sweet, like rain that's been thinking too much. Then, from behind the trees, a faint jingling. A cowbell. You both sit up, alert. A single cow wanders into view, stares at the two of you, then meanders to the edge of the spring. It drinks, stares again, and plods off. Apollo watches it go. That one's seen things. You agree. You pack up. But before you leave, Apollo does something curious. He takes the flute and places it on the stone rim of the basin. Let someone else find it, he says. Let someone else try. The wind carries the scent of figs again. You glance back at the spring one last time. The flute glints in the sun, waiting. You walk in silence, both of you steeped in whatever that moment was. Nostalgia? Forgiveness? Some flavor of peace? The road is quieter now. Fewer birds, fewer branches to duck under. Just long, warm stretches of path flanked by olive trees like dozing sentinels. Eventually, Apollo says, you know, there's a story I never told you. You glance at him. It's about a farmer who tried to sue a god for bad weather. How'd that go? Well, the god didn't show up to court, he says. Sent a flock of geese instead. They were extremely persuasive. You both dissolve into laughter that trails behind you like smoke. The road turns. And just beyond it, the edge of something new. The path is now silvered with dusk, that particular shade of lavender blue that softens all edges. You and Apollo walk more slowly, not from weariness, exactly, but the sort of quiet that settles in when a story has said nearly all it came to say. Ahead, scattered ruins emerge from the hillside, pillars like fallen chess pieces, olive presses long gone silent, the crumbled footprint of what was once a shrine, or maybe a school, or maybe just someone's very ambitious gazebo. It's hard to say. Apollo gestures vaguely. This was supposed to be my temple. You stop. Supposed to be? He shrugs. Funding fell through. Or maybe I got distracted. Or maybe I just realized I didn't want a temple. Why not? He studies the stone in his sandal. Because people only build temples for gods who've stopped trying. You let that sink in. The ruins are humble. Ivy has crept across most of the foundation and bees hover lazily around a cracked marble altar. Someone's left a half-burnt candle there, an offering, perhaps, or just a forgotten picnic accessory. Apollo picks it up, sniffs it. Jasmine. Classy. You sit on what remains of a column drum, rounded and smoothed by centuries of wind and goats and teenage poets with too much time and too little direction. He sits beside you, knees drawn up. I tried to be everything, he says. God of music. Of healing. Of truth. Of the sun. You left out archery. And that. But the thing no one tells you is that if you say yes to every role, you don't get to stay in any of them. You nod. Mortals do this too, he adds. Switching jobs, reinventing themselves. but you have the comfort of aging out of your bad decisions. You both glance around at the not-quite temple. It's weird, he murmurs, being eternal but unsure where you belong. A gentle wind picks up, stirring the leaves and your hair. Somewhere, a nightingale starts to sing clear and simple. You ask, do you ever wish you were mortal? All the time, he answers without hesitation. But only during thunderstorms, or funerals, or while drinking mediocre wine. You smile. He pauses. Then, and when cows ignore me, a beat, still bitter. He exhales. Still impressed, honestly. The shadows deepen, and the ruins begin to vanish into themselves. You walk through them slowly, touching old stones, feeling the weight and warmth of memory. Not just Apollo's, but the countless others who prayed here, napped here, carved graffiti into here. Do you hear that? Apollo whispers. You pause. At first, it's just wind. Then, a soft, almost inaudible lowing in the distance. Another cow. He grins. They always find me eventually. You shake your head. Maybe you're just better at hurting than you thought. He laughs. Or maybe cows just like sad music. The two of you sit on a ridge overlooking the valley. The last light kisses the horizon, and far off, a shepherd's dog barks once, then settles. Thank you, Apollo says suddenly, for walking with me, for not asking me to turn into a swan or a ray of sunshine or whatever else mortals think we're good for. You tilt your head. You're welcome. For what it's worth, I think you'd have made a great cowherd. He grins, eyes soft. Only if you'd be my assistant. I don't do dung, you reply firmly. Fair, he says, lying back against a slab of stone. You know, cows never care about prophecies, or epithets, or temple dedications. You lie beside him. Maybe that's why they're perfect. The stars start appearing, first a few hesitant ones, then more, until the sky blooms with silver freckles. Apollo hums a tune, something old, slow, maybe even pre-myth. It settles over the landscape like mist. The ruins sleep. The cows somewhere chew thoughtfully. And the god beside you exhales one long, luxurious breath. You don't speak again. Not because there's nothing to say, but because some endings are quiet by nature, like dusk, like sleep, like the last note of a lullaby played for no one in particular, and yet meant for you all the same. Hey guys, tonight we're heading back in time, not to watch great pharaohs rise or mighty pyramids being built, but to quietly sneak into the sand-dusted world of Egyptian bureaucracy. Imagine it's sunrise on the banks of the Nile. The river glistens like a lazy ribbon of bronze, birds are chattering above the reeds, and somewhere nearby, a donkey is very unhappy about being awake. But you? You're trudging toward a low mud-brick building with a slight stoop in your back and a waxed stylus tucked behind your ear. Inside, the scent is familiar, sun-warmed papyrus, ink made from soot and gum, and you probably won't survive this job. Not from battle, famine, or plague, but from boredom. These men and women spent decades writing the same things over and over. One misstroke could mean start. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing this sleepy little history club grow. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're not here for glory. You're here to help track temple donations, and the high priest is very particular about his jars of honey. The room you enter is warm and still. Clay shelves lean slightly under the weight of stacked scrolls, each wrapped in a bit of linen and sealed with faded string. Your job? Unroll them, double-check their contents, and reshelve in a system even the gods would find needlessly complicated. Your colleague beside you is already muttering. His scroll's ink has faded again. He'll have to hold it up to the light, squint through 40-year-old inventory, and then update it by hand. It's a Tuesday. He has done this every Tuesday for the last 19 years. Bureaucracy in ancient Egypt was no afterthought, it was the glue. Without it, grain wouldn't be counted, temples wouldn't receive incense, and pyramid builders wouldn't get paid. Historians still argue whether this administrative efficiency was a cause or an effect of Egypt's long, stable dynasties. But one thing's for sure, scribes ran the show. Outside your office, the Nile laps gently against the quay. A young boy delivers a fresh stack of reeds from which new writing scrolls will be made. You offer him a date and a smile. He offers a sigh. He's apprenticing to become a scribe. He already knows his future will smell like old ink and roasted barley. Your supervisor appears. He's exactly 82 years old and has never retired. No one is quite sure why. He begins today, as always, by inspecting the ink supply, rearranging your desk slightly, and reminding you that commas, while unofficial, must be placed with care. Do not anger the gods of syntax, he whispers, not joking at all. A fly buzzes near your ear. Use what? Mississippi. The fly lives another day, possibly to join the pantheon. Lunch arrives. It is flatbread, onions, and a small bowl of lentils. You eat in silence, watching the slow current of the river and wondering briefly what it would be like to be a priest or a soldier. Then you remember they also fill out forms, and one of them brought a goat into your office last week to dispute a tax record. By mid-afternoon, the scroll shelves blur in your vision. You are tasked with archiving a particularly long decree about fish quotas during low flood years. Someone once copied it in hieratic script so tiny it looks like spider legs. Your back aches. You drink water from a clay cup. You consider retiring at 40 like your cousin did. He went into pottery, but then again, you've just gotten the hang of the new ink ratio. Somewhere, a temple bell rings. Probably an offering ceremony. You won't be attending, but you will have to log the priest's receipt of frankincense and saffron. You note idly that your list of gifts to the gods is longer than your list of personal belongings. As the sun dips low, you reach for one last scroll, a list of village elders who have not paid their yearly tribute. You recognize a few names. They always pay late. One once paid in eels. You wish he wouldn't. The room dims. You light a small oil lamp and mark one final note in your register. The ink smells faintly of acacia. Your day is done. As you roll up the scroll and slip it into its worn cubby, a breeze slips through the window, rustling the edges of old papyri. You pause, listening to the soft hush of ancient knowledge breathing. It's quiet, deeply boring, and somehow perfect. Your fingertips are stained a comfortable shade of gray from the ink, again. But that's the mark of progress in your world, the ancient office of letters and ledgers. Today, you're headed not to the filing shelves, but to the scribe hall, a long, narrow room packed with boys and young men who are, with varying degrees of interest, learning the sacred art of writing. You slide into the room with the quiet shuffle of someone used to not being noticed. The air smells like dust and old shoes, with just a hint of sweat from the poor lad in the corner trying to memorize 30 different words for grain. This is where the pipeline begins. These are the future scroll wranglers, tax tabblers, and ceremonial permit drafters. It's easy to forget how much training this takes. Contrary to modern myths, scribes weren't just literate, they were elite. Only a tiny slice of the population ever learned to write, and of those, only the most meticulous could handle the infinite tasks assigned to the bureaucracy. You observe a boy copying a sentence that translates, roughly, to a wise man listens. A fool argues with his supervisor. You smirk. Some sayings really do age well. The teacher, a man with the posture of a fishing hook, walks slowly among the rows of students. He points with his reed pen to an error 2 lines too close, and suddenly sacred geese becomes goose-shaped gods, which, while fascinating, causes legal confusion. The student groans and starts again. You remember your own training. The stiff reed pens. The scratch of ink against papyrus. The endless recopying of moral maxims, temple inventories, and fictitious court records. Even now, if someone startled you in your sleep and shouted, "Write the word for barley," you could do it blindfolded, upside down, and mildly annoyed. In one corner of the hall, a small group is practicing math, not for engineering, but for managing temple donations and village taxes. They're using pebbles to calculate fractions of beer jugs. One student tries to hide that he spilled honey on his number chart. You pretend not to notice. Historians still argue whether scribes were truly respected or merely tolerated. They certainly weren't warriors or priests, but then again the pharaohs needed them. Desperately. Without scribes, laws went unread, tribute went unrecorded, and the divine order, which oddly involved a lot of grain math, unraveled. Some archaeologists even refer to scribes as the quiet class of kings. Back in the training hall, someone knocks over a stack of papyri. The rustle is thunderous. Everyone freezes. The teacher sighs the sigh of a man who has seen too many ink stains and not enough promotions. You slip out the side door before you're conscripted into cleanup. Outside, the sun is high, and your mind drifts to a curious memory. A scribe you once met who swore he saw writing as meditation. He claimed the act of copying brought him peace. You found him curled one day in the archive room, fast asleep with his head on a tax list from year 38 of Pharaoh Amenhotep. Later that day, you return to your own desk, and the rhythm begins again. Dip the pen, make the stroke, adjust your posture, re-roll the scroll. A cart arrives with newly cut papyrus sheets. You take a deep breath. Fresh scrolls always smell like distant rain and reeds. A colleague nudges you and whispers that the high scribe is retiring. Rumor has it he's moving to a farm by the marshes to live quietly among ducks. You wish him well. You also briefly envy the ducks. Toward the end of the day, you're summoned to review a student's first official document. It's a temple receipt, clumsily written but mostly legible. You mark a few corrections, circle the part where granary was spelled like granny, and offer an encouraging nod. The boy beams. You remember that feeling of seeing your first scroll tied with string, filed into a dusty cubby, and forgotten forever. But it meant you were real. The sun leans toward the horizon. Shadows stretch across the floor, and the scratching of reeds on papyrus slows. One by one, the trainees pack their ink blocks and tiny clay writing kits. You linger, taking a moment to feel the hush that follows their departure. It's not silence, it's a gentle quiet, the kind that holds secrets and maybe a few coffee rings on century-old documents. Before heading home, you tuck one scroll into your satchel, an old proverb compilation you like to reread. It ends with a favorite line, "The pen outlasts the sword." But the pen never gets a day off. You step into the outer courtyard, greeted by a chorus of cranes calling from the riverbank. The light is gold now, rich and soft, casting long shadows from the palm trees that fringe the temple complex. It's the hour when scribes head home and farmers call their oxen back from the fields. But not you. Not yet. Today, your work takes you to the heart of the temple gardens, where records say the sacred onions were growing suspiciously well this season. The temple gardens are a strange contradiction, part botanical paradise, part bureaucratic nightmare. Every corner is weighed, recorded, mapped. You walk past raised beds of coriander and fenugreek, each plot marked with a painted sherd telling you which priest is responsible for which crop. The scent is pungent and pleasant, sweet basil mixing with garlic and damp earth. In your arms, a stack of tablets to be cross-checked. These gardens don't just feed the gods symbolically, they feed actual priests, scribes, workers, and the occasional temple cat that refuses to leave the fish shed. The Nile may provide, but the temple accountants ensure no one's taking more fish than they're owed. You stop near a small grove of sycamores where an apprentice is trying to sketch root dimensions without smudging the ink. He looks like he'd rather be measuring cloud shapes, and frankly, who could blame him? You pat his shoulder and move along. The bees are heavy in the air near the date palms. Someone's left a jar of honey open again. Possibly an offering, possibly a snack. You pretend it's sacred either way. Historians still argue whether temple gardens were more symbolic than practical. Some scrolls wax poetic about gardens as metaphors for divine order, with each row representing cosmic balance. Others point to sheer output, thousands of onions, gourds, lentils, and even tiny papyrus stalks harvested each season. You're inclined to believe both, spiritual geometry and really good leaks. Around the corner, you arrive at the sacred lotus pond. This is the part no one dares to miscatalogue, not because of danger, but because High Priest Menhotep once fell in trying to count the lilies and now insists the pond is his alone to interpret. The water is still tonight, reflecting the lavender haze of dusk. A frog plops in. You resist the urge to name it Osiris the Jumping. You crouch to update the pond's moisture level. An absurdly specific task, but essential for the ceremonial tea brewing scheduled for the equinox. You note that the reeds seem thinner this year. Perhaps the crocodiles have been browsing again. Yes, crocodiles do that. You once saw one eat an entire basket of cucumbers. The priest was not amused. On the way back to the administrative annex, a gardener stops you. He's worried about the figs. "They're turning before they sweeten," he mutters. You write it down, adding a small drawing of a wrinkled fig for clarity. Later, you'll log the concern under agricultural anomalies, divine or otherwise. At a bench near the grapevine trellis, two old scribes are playing Senate. One offers you a seat. You decline with a smile. You've got scrolls to file and possibly a bribe of goat cheese waiting on your desk for expedited papyrus delivery. Temple logistics are a delicate dance of favors and fermented dairy. You think back to an odd note you once read in a different temple archive. "Beware the gardener who sings. His tomatoes are too good." Was it a joke? A warning? A culinary curse? You may never know. But you do remember how delicious those tomatoes were. As you pass the herb plot, the scent of dill and cumin rises in the warm evening breeze. The garden is quieter now, the priests having gone inside for evening chants. A single ibis stalks through the shallows of the irrigation ditch, looking scholarly and slightly annoyed, as they always do. You pause at the entryway to jot a final note. Someone's replanted the onions in the shape of a scarab. Decorative? Possibly. Unauthorized? Definitely. You sigh, smile, and log it anyway. Maybe the gods like their alliums a little playful. By the time you reach the papyrus archive, the sky is deep blue. The temple is hushed, save for a distant chant echoing from the sanctuary. You step inside, your sandals quiet against the stone floor. The moment stretches, calm and cool. You made it through another day of holy farming records, philosophical vegetables, and amphibious symbolism. You're up before sunrise the next morning, your body moving on temple time, governed more by bird calls and floodwaters than by anything resembling a weekend. The air still smells faintly of night. Damp stone, dew-slicked reeds, and the lingering ash of yesterday's incense. Today, your task isn't in the main garden at all, it's out on the lake. You pad quietly through the cloisters, nodding to the guard who's always chewing lotus root like it's jerky. You pass through a reed-framed gate and into the boathouse, where an apprentice is trying very hard not to drop an amphora full of fertilizer into the water. He's losing. You help him stabilize it with one hand and slide your own wax tablet into your satchel with the other. The temple has a fleet of flat-bottomed boats, light, nimble, and built for gliding across the surface of the sacred lake. You climb into one, brush away a palm frond someone's been using as a cushion, and push off with your pole. Instantly, the noise of the world falls away, replaced by the soft lapping of water and the whir of insects in the reeds. You're heading to the Chinampas, the floating gardens. They're more elaborate than most people expect. Rafts built of woven reeds, layered with soil, compost, and bound together with enough faith and engineering to raise eyebrows across dynasties. Most people don't realize the Egyptians tried versions of these centuries before the Aztecs made them famous. Your pole dips into the lakebed as you steer around a nesting egret. The morning mist is still heavy, shrouding the garden islands in white. Through the haze, a glimmer, rows of green, precise and serene, floating like sleeping mats for the gods. The scent of mint wafts across the surface. You dock against one of the Chinampas, stepping onto its springy surface with practiced ease. It's like walking on bread dough, stable, but only if you move with the right rhythm. Rows of garlic, lettuce, and young flax ripple under the early breeze. You note everything in your tablet right down to the direction of the wind. You learn the hard way that your supervisor is weirdly obsessed with wind patterns. The wind speaks the harvest, he once told you while wearing an onion wreath. You just nodded and made a note. A young boy appears with a clay cup of warm beer. You thank him. His job is to ferry supplies between the temple and the Chinampas. He's 7, barefoot, and probably knows more about raft composting than most of the high priests. While you sip, you overhear a low conversation from the next raft over. 2 gardeners are debating the ethics of singing to their melons. The cucumbers get jealous. One mutters. You decide this is the kind of conflict you're not paid enough to mediate. Historians still argue whether these floating gardens were truly floating or semi-fixed platforms anchored in place. Some believe the ancient engineers used submerged stones to hold them steady. Others think they moved like slow lily pads, guided by the breath of the Nile. Your boat rocked once during a mild flood, and half the onions relocated to the next garden. That's about as scientific as you're prepared to get. You kneel to inspect a patch of leeks. They're thriving suspiciously so. You dig gently, uncovering a dark, gelatinous clump. Ah, the sacred fish mulch. Probably donated, willingly or otherwise, by the temple kitchens. You make a mental note to check on kitchen inventory later. Again, floating gardens require constant repair. Roots grow into the raft's structure, weighing it down. Too much water, and the whole thing sinks. Too little, and the compost dries to powder. It's a precarious balance, like trying to meditate on a seesaw. You tighten a reed mat corner with your belt cord, hoping no one notices the sagging patch near the onions. A soft plop interrupts your thoughts. A turtle has climbed up onto the raft, clearly assuming it's now his sunbathing platform. You stare at each other in silence. He wins. You relocate to the next Chinampa. There, a priest is meditating beside a small shrine, whispering something about the fertility of cucumbers. You step carefully around him. One does not interrupt cucumber prayers. Instead, you focus on the wildflowers growing along the raft's edge. They weren't planted. They just appeared. Probably windborne. Maybe divine. Possibly just very ambitious seeds. As you wrap up your survey, the mist begins to lift. The lake glows silver blue, dotted with garden aisles like puzzle pieces the gods forgot to finish assembling. It's so peaceful you almost forget the entire temple council is expecting your growth charts by midday. On the ride back, you watch your own reflection wobble in the water. Your hair's a mess. Your tunic's wet at the hem. There's fish mulch on your elbow. But the lake is calm. The floating gardens are thriving. And someone remembered to bring honey beer for breakfast. You glide into the boathouse just as the sun crests the far shore. The apprentice from earlier is snoring in a pile of nets. You step over him and back into the cool shadow of the temple, already thinking about how you're going to explain cucumber jealousy in an official report. By midday, you're hunched at your desk with 3 styluses, 5 scrolls, and a headache that smells faintly of goat ink. The temple's accounting chamber, if you can call a room lined with papyrus towers a chamber, is humming with heat and murmured prayers to Thoth for better handwriting. The lake, the gardens, the sacred fish mulch. All of it must now become data. Endless columns of symbols, some of which even you suspect were invented by scribes just to avoid repeating words. You rub your temples, wondering why slightly wilted coriander needs its own hieroglyph. Your main task this afternoon is updating the seasonal harvest log, which sounds more thrilling than it is. You're calculating projected yields of lentils versus actual lentils, minus the lentils donated to funerary feasts, the lentils eaten by birds, and, this is your favorite, the lentils that disappeared under mysterious circumstances. That last category seems to grow mysteriously each year. There's a rhythm to it, though. A strange meditative calm that settles in as you draw tiny grain symbols and mark the variations in rainfall. You remember the old master scribe's words, "Agriculture is math with mud on it." You didn't laugh then either. To your left, a junior scribe is painstakingly illustrating the growth cycle of cucumbers, complete with little smiley faces on the fully ripe ones. You consider saying something about decorum, but decide that smiling vegetables are a morale booster you won't sabotage. A sudden gust of wind rattles the shutters. You glance outside. A dust storm is gathering on the horizon, nothing major, but enough to make people edgy. The kind of weather that gets blamed for missing sandals and bad dreams. Historians still argue whether Egypt's temple economy was truly centralized or if priests were more like regional CEOs running private food empires. Judging by the scrolls on your desk, the truth is somewhere in between. There are notes here from merchants, gardeners, even a potter complaining that his official fig storage pots keep getting reassigned for wine. You underline that. The high priest will want to taste that wine. You stand to stretch, knocking over a small container of date syrup. It slowly oozes toward your payroll records. You stop it with a papyrus blotter and whisper a quiet thank you to whichever god oversees sticky disasters. It's break time. Or, as the priests call it, contemplative silence over bread and beer. You join the others in the shaded colonnade. Someone's brought sesame flatbread, still warm. You tear off a piece and sit cross-legged on a mat embroidered with what might be a stylized leek. Or a snake. Hard to say. A gardener ambles up and plops down beside you, holding a clay tablet that smells faintly of onion and regret. He's got a complaint. The irrigation ditches are being clogged by, wait for it, ceremonial flower petals. Apparently, someone has been tossing entire armfuls into the water during moon rituals, and now everything's backflowing like a divine plumbing disaster. You nod and scribble the issue down. You'll file it under ritual interference with hydraulics. Not the first time. Just then, a novice runs past yelling something about the goose again. You don't even ask. You know which goose. It belongs to the assistant chef, has a vendetta against left sandals, and once stole a wax tablet containing 2 weeks of leak accounting. You quietly slide your sandals under your mat. After lunch, you wander toward the seed archives, a cool, clay-lined room where the temple stores samples of every plant grown in its care. The place smells of dust and fennel. Neatly labeled amphorae sit in rows like tiny time capsules. You open one marked Sacred Barley Festival Strain and peer inside. The grains look like miniature gold teeth. On a shelf nearby, a much older jar catches your eye. Faded paint. A cracked seal. You gently ease it open and find a tangle of dried flowers and what might be a tiny reed comb. A love token? An offering? Or just someone's lunch pouch from 300 years ago? Historians would argue. You quietly reseal it and mark the jar as delicate, requires senior review, which usually means I don't know what this is, but it feels important. Before heading back to your scrolls, you pass the door to the perfume room. Yes, the temple has one. Officially, it's for producing oils and incense for rituals. Unofficially, it's also where certain scribes go to accidentally spill rose water on themselves before court meetings. You push the door open just enough to steal a whiff of myrrh and crushed lotus. Instant mood improvement. You return to your desk just as the afternoon sun begins to mellow. Shadows stretch long across the sandstone tiles. The accounting chamber is quieter now, its energy softened by full bellies and the comforting repetition of record-keeping. You ink the final symbol on your harvest tablet, blow gently to dry it, and place it in the out tray. One more task done. One more step in the endless dance of planting, growing, measuring, and remembering. And somewhere, maybe tomorrow, someone will thank the gods for exactly 12 baskets of leeks and never know it was you who made sure that number was right. You wake the next morning to the soft splash of oars cutting through still water. Today, you're scheduled for a routine inspection of the Chinampas, the floating gardens that drift gently on the surface of the sacred lake like rafts spun from dreams and compost. Your ride is a reed boat, long and narrow, with woven seats and a small roof to keep the sun off your head. The ferryman is silent as always, except when muttering lovingly to his paddle. You don't ask. The lake is mirror smooth this early in the day, broken only by the occasional frog leaping from reed to reed or the ripple of a fish beneath the surface. The air smells of wet earth, flower pollen, and a hint of fermenting compost. Honestly, it's better than most city streets. As you glide past the first cluster of Chinampas, you spot the neat rows of vegetables, amaranth, squash, beans, all growing with casual abundance atop these floating plots. From a distance, the Chinampas look like tiny green islands. Up close, they're marvels of human creativity and, let's be honest, a lot of muck. Each one is made by staking out a rectangle in the lake and piling it high with mud dredged from the lakebed, mixed with rotting vegetation and bordered with live willow trees whose roots help keep everything in place. Historians still debate whether the idea for this ingenious system originated with an older culture or if it was a spontaneous Aztec innovation. Either way, it's efficient, oddly beautiful, and smells suspiciously like cabbage most of the time. You hop out onto one of the larger platforms. It rocks slightly beneath your feet but holds firm. The farmers greet you with the kind of wary respect reserved for temple scribes, especially the ones who also control the allocation of manure. Your task here is mostly observation. Count the plots, check for signs of overgrowth, and ensure no one has been poaching from neighboring gardens. You spot one man harvesting chilies with suspicious enthusiasm. You make a note. Chilies are temple property when grown on these gardens, even if they set your tongue on fire and your dignity on pause. You stroll along a narrow path between Chinampas, noting the variety of crops. One has marigolds in full bloom, likely grown for offerings. Another is bursting with maize, the stalks tall and rustling like dry whispers in the wind. A small shrine stands at the edge of the water, its tiny stone face smudged with soot and flowers. Someone has left 3 miniature squash and a bead necklace in offering. Probably for good harvest luck. Or maybe just because they were short on coin. A farmer approaches, wiping his hands on his tunic. He's eager to show you his experimental plot. He's been testing a new crop rotation, something involving alternating beans and sunflowers. He talks fast, and you catch phrases like less root fatigue and increased frog sightings, which may or may not be related. You nod thoughtfully and promise to mention it to the high priest. You will. Probably. A heron glides overhead, slow and graceful. It lands near a mound of water hyacinths and begins its patient hunt for minnows. You take a moment to simply watch. There's something deeply peaceful about this place. Everything moves slowly, deliberately, like time itself takes a nap here. On the way back, you pass by a compost barge. Yes, that's a thing. It's where the farmers dump lakeweed, fish bones, and various decomposing mysteries to rot before they're reapplied as fertilizer. The smell is bold. You resist the urge to hold your nose. The compost master waves cheerfully, holding up what looks like a prize-winning lump of fermented duckweed. You smile and pretend to be impressed. That's diplomacy. Back on the boat, you pass by a floating kitchen platform. 2 women are cooking maize cakes over a stone hearth balanced precariously on woven mats. The smoke rises lazily into the morning air, carrying with it the scent of spices and ash. You wave, and one of them tosses you a warm cake wrapped in a fig leaf. You thank her with a temple blessing and immediately burn your tongue. Worth it. As the sun climbs higher, more activity fills the lake. Children paddle by on rafts shaped like jaguars. Priests chant on a distant dock. A young couple rows awkwardly in circles, clearly on a date or a dare. And always the gardens quietly floating, quietly feeding, quietly surviving. It's strange to think that these Chinampas support the entire city's diet. All this lush green bounty bobbing on a lake that was once considered sacred and untouchable. Now it's a patchwork of devotion and dirt. a living tapestry woven from survival, cleverness, and many, many tons of mud. Historians still question how the Aztecs maintained the structural integrity of so many floating fields. Some say they used anchored bamboo frameworks. Others argue it was the willow trees alone. You suspect it was mostly trial and error, plus a stubborn refusal to let crops sink. As the boat turns back toward the temple docks, you notice one chinampa at the edge of the lake that's gone a bit wild. Flowers growing every which way, vegetables tangling with herbs, a small clay statue of a rain god half swallowed by mint. You make a note to inspect it later, or maybe you'll just let it be. After all, even floating gardens deserve a moment to go feral. You dock just as the bells begin to chime noon. The city shimmers in the heat haze, but your head is still full of the cool green hush of the lake. You step off the boat, legs wobbling slightly, and head back toward the temple with a basket of maize cakes and a newfound respect for anyone who manages to grow tomatoes on a raft. Afternoon sun drapes over the city like a hot blanket, and you're not even pretending to be enthusiastic as you trudge back into the temple complex. You've got sun in your eyes, mud on your sandals, and a half-eaten maize cake in your pocket. Standard temple scribe problems. Inside, it's marginally cooler. The thick stone walls soak up some of the heat, and a few clever apprentices have hung soaked reeds over the doorways for a bit of natural air conditioning. It smells faintly of lime plaster, incense, and the unmistakable tang of parrot droppings. Someone forgot to let the sacred birds out again. You settle down at your writing mat with a groan and begin the real task of the day: paperwork. Endless inventory scrolls, harvest tallies, and fertility assessments. You dip your brush into black pigment, the ink slightly gritty from the crushed obsidian used to darken it. Each mark you make ties you tighter to the empire's bureaucracy, an empire held together, oddly enough, by floating vegetables and good penmanship. As you work, runners come and go. One brings word from the Western District. A new set of chinampas has been built overnight, probably illegally, which means another inspection. Another runner brings 2 roasted grasshoppers and a mango slice from someone who appreciates your scribal beauty. You blush and eat the mango. Then the high priest drifts into your chamber like a thundercloud with sandals. He has a scroll for you, but more importantly, he has questions. Big, abstract, deeply inconvenient ones. How many rows of maize can one chinampa support without divine intervention? He asks, stroking his beard. You blink. 7, you offer. He seems satisfied. Or confused. Either way, he leaves and you return to your tallying. Somewhere deep in your notes, you find a strange anomaly: a set of chinampas listed as both active farmland and sacred land. You double-check, triple-check. It's there. A bureaucratic contradiction in the very heart of Aztec lake law. Intrigued, you gather your scrolls and make your way to the map room, where ancient diagrams of the lake are painted onto deer hide and stretched across cedar frames. You trace the name with your finger. Tlalixtica, the land that sinks and grows. Vague, suspicious, perfect. A quick detour to the archives reveals only scattered notes. One mentions the garden that hums at dusk. Another lists offerings of jade beans and powdered obsidian. There's even a whisper in a poem attributed to the poet-scribe Tezamok, where corn walks and water waits, gods sip from lettuce leaves. Beautiful, utterly unhelpful. Historians still puzzle over the legends of semi-mythic chinampas, gardens rumored to move on their own or disappear in fog, or house gods disguised as gardeners. While most scholars dismiss these tales as poetic nonsense, the persistent mentions in official scrolls suggest that even the bureaucrats weren't entirely sure where belief ended and agriculture began. You decide to investigate. Again, because naps are apparently forbidden in this sacred workplace. You gather a few supplies: a reed boat, a fresh ink brush, a ceremonial snack pouch, and a minor blessing from the temple rain priest, who insists on smearing blue dye on your forehead for luck and mildew protection. Sure, back on the water, the sun hangs low and golden. The lake seems quieter now, more watchful. You steer toward the general area of Tlalixtica, past familiar floating fields and into the hazier stretches where the air smells less like compost and more like wet feathers and old stories. Suddenly, you spot it. A cluster of chinampas you've never noticed before, ringed by willow trees so thick they form a sort of green veil. The boat slows. The reeds creak. A frog belches somewhere in the underbrush and you nearly drop your ceremonial snack pouch. It's always the frog. You push through and enter a space unlike the others. These chinampas aren't rectangular and neat, they're rounded, winding, like a lazy river made of soil and roots. Crops grow in spirals and mosaics, peppers beside lilies, squash beside cauliflowers, maize climbing trellises shaped like stars. It's a strange, living mural. There's no sign of human tending, and yet everything is thriving. Bees drift lazily through the air. A turtle blinks at you from a shaded stone. And then, somewhere between goosebumps and mosquito bites, you hear it. A low hum, not mechanical, of course. More like resonance, like reeds vibrating in unison or a distant chant. You hold still. The hum grows faint, then fades, like a dream you can't quite catch. You write this all down quickly, even the turtle part. Especially the turtle part. The sun begins to sink. Light dances across the lake, casting golden ripples. You take one last look at the strange gardens of Tlalixtica and begin the slow row back, uncertain whether what you found is a forgotten experiment in agriculture or a myth still patiently growing in the mud. Either way, you plan to return tomorrow with more mango. The next morning, you wake early, not out of discipline, but because your neighbor's turkey has decided to perform a pre-dawn solo concert. You grumble, grab your bag, and head back to the lake before most of the city has even begun boiling its cacao. Today, you're not dressed like a scribe. You've opted for something less conspicuous, simple cotton, a faded sash, and no official temple dye on your forehead. That last one proved way too effective yesterday, mildew protection or not, you sneezed for an hour. Your goal, spend an entire day in Tlalixtica, the humming garden, to observe and understand what exactly is going on. Is it a fluke of ingenious farming? A forgotten district? Or is this truly one of those legendary gardens spoken of only in old priest poems and children's bedtime riddles? The journey is smooth. You know the way now, past the maize gardens, past the cormorant platforms, beyond the fisherman who always waves at you with a fish in each hand like some sort of aquatic juggler. The mist over Tlalixtica lifts just as you arrive, and this time you notice more. Strange stone markers half submerged at the garden edges, carved with glyphs you don't immediately recognize. Not your usual scribal alphabet. These symbols are older, cruder, maybe, but purposeful. You sketch a few for later analysis. You step onto the floating island. It sinks slightly under your weight, then adjusts, like a waterbed made of roots and good intentions. Your sandals squelch faintly on the spongy soil. Plants grow wild but not chaotic, like a music piece with no sheet but perfect rhythm. Your senses adjust. Sounds filter in slowly. Water lapping against the woven walls, birds whispering to each other in the canopy. The low hum you thought was your imagination returns. You still can't pinpoint the source. It's not musical, not mechanical, just harmonic, like the gardens tuned to the lake. You settle beneath a gourd trellis and begin sketching. Today, you're documenting crop layout, the surprising use of companion planting where chili bushes are cozied up next to aloe and flowering herbs edge every path to invite pollinators. You note the precise spacing, the natural irrigation, the worm-rich earth that smells like black pepper and ancient rain. It's perfect, too perfect. Around midday, you lie back on a bed of moss and let the world pass gently over you. A dragonfly the size of your hand hovers nearby, decides you're boring, and buzzes off. You let your fingers trail in the warm water and consider a theory. Maybe this was a priest's retreat once. A hidden experiment left untended yet thriving. Or perhaps it's a sacred offering to the lake gods, a place not meant for human feet. Historians still argue whether some chinampas were intended as religious spaces rather than strictly agricultural. The line between practical and spiritual was always blurred in the Aztec worldview. A maize stalk was never just a plant, it was a gift from Centiatl, the maize deity. Every harvest was an act of gratitude, not efficiency. As you drift into a lazy nap under the gourd leaves, you dream. In your dream, the chinampa moves not violently, but with purpose. It glides softly across the lake, weaving between other islands like a polite boat. You stand upon it, not steering, just along for the ride. At its center, a figure waits, not a god, not a gardener, but a woman weaving soil and seeds like cloth. She hums the garden song. It's the same one you heard before. The same one that isn't quite a song at all. You wake with a start, a gourd dangling inches above your nose. When dawn kisses the city once again, you're already at the lake's edge, cradling a clay mug of bitter cacao, thick enough to chew. The city is just waking up, but you've been too restless to sleep deeply. The previous day's discoveries are inked across your skin in smudges and half-moons under your eyes. You don't even change into formal temple robes. Today, you need to blend in, not stand out. Your team joins you quietly. A weathered herbalist named Zokoyatsin who claims he once fed a Tilatoni with nothing but lakeweed stew, and a young apprentice gardener named Malinal, who's so excited he accidentally sits on a cactus before the canoe even leaves the dock. The journey across the water is quiet, just the rhythmic splash of paddles and the sleepy chorus of lake birds. The morning mist curls like ribbon across the surface, and you notice how the chinampas, from afar, look like they're floating just above the water, like ghosts of gardens. Today, you're investigating something specific: how the chinampa at Tlalixtica recycles its own nutrients. You remember the richness of the soil, the vibrant roots, the lack of rot. Something here defies the usual patterns. When you arrive, Malinal practically tumbles out of the canoe in excitement. "It smells like sweet soil," she whispers, her eyes wide. She's not wrong. The scent is earthy, yes, but there's something layered, floral notes, something a little spicy. The air here is thick with plant breath. You split up, agreeing to meet by the aloe spiral in 2 hours. You start at the edges, where the roots dip into the water, where aquatic plants form natural borders. Duckweed floats in lazy clusters, and among them, snails glide like tiny clerks tending invisible ledgers. You kneel, dip your hands into the shallows, and lift a clump of root. It's knotted with fine threads, filaments that almost glimmer in the sun. Fungi? Fiber? You can't tell. You sketch it, note the smell, and glance up to see a frog blinking at you with disapproval. You apologize and move on. Zoko Yatsen calls you over. He's standing near a patch of amaranth that seems to be thriving unnaturally well. "These have been replanted recently," he murmurs, pointing at the base. "But not by human hands. Look at the spacing. Look at how they follow the fungal paths." Sure enough, under the amaranth, pale strands like buried threads weave outward. You've seen these before in forest groves in the sacred orchid fields up north. Fungal networks. Mycorrhizae. Plants whispering through dirt. Historians still argue whether the Aztecs understood soil microbiomes in any scientific way. But the way this garden operates, it's hard not to think they knew more than they let on. You dig deeper. Literally, the chinampa's layers reveal themselves at the bottom, lakebed muck and shredded reeds. Above that, alternating bands of sediment and plant matter, an ancient compost pile that somehow breathes. You find broken pottery shards crushed and spread like calcium-rich mulch and fish bones arranged in peculiar patterns near maize roots. There's logic here, not superstition. A soil engineering language passed down without ink. You find a plot growing cacao, not typical for this altitude, and your fingers tingle as you brush its leaves. You recognize this one, a heat-sensitive variant usually seen only near the southern borderlands. Here, it's thriving under the canopy of taller plants, mimicking the forest understory. A microclimate built by design. You're struck, suddenly, by the thought this garden is a mind. Not in the metaphorical sense, but as an actual system of thought. A network grown slowly, season by season, where each plant teaches the next how to thrive. Where every worm and root and buried potsherd is a word in a sentence written in dirt. Back at the aloe spiral, Malinal presents a bundle of lakeweed she's tied with braided maize silk. "Look," she says, "it grows in a spiral around the poles. But only where bees land." She's right. Bees, fat, fuzzy, and indifferent to your presence, buzz along the path of her finger. They land, sip, and move precisely along the shaded perimeter. Pollination paths. Designed like clockwork, as you walk the perimeter again before sunset, you start seeing patterns you missed before. The orientation of trellises based on wind flow, the quiet presence of certain flowers only where specific insects congregate, the slight tilt of planting beds to channel overflow when rains come too hard. You sit down on a mossy log. Well, no, not a log at all. It's an old canoe, half submerged, now a planter for wild cucumbers. Life repurposing memory. There's a sense of continuity here. Not just in the way crops grow, but in how nothing is discarded. Everything is fed back into the cycle: soil, stories, broken tools, and old rituals. Even your own thoughts feel looped into this place, like vines curling gently around a trellis of time. You close your eyes and breathe deeply. For a moment, you feel less like a scribe and more like a root yourself. Something quiet, listening, contributing, holding the island in place. The wind picks up slightly, sending tiny ripples across the lake and rustling the beans overhead. You're not sure what to write about this place anymore. A report would fail it. A poem might come close. But maybe, just maybe, the best thing you can do is convince others to come and feel it, or at least believe it exists. You dip your fingers into the soil one last time. It's warm. The night air wraps around your chinampa like a silken shawl. Cool and just a little damp, the way water carries secrets. You're back at your small hut, a reed-thatched structure perched at the edge of your assigned garden. You've decided to stay overnight, to see how the garden breathes after dark. You lie on a woven mat, listening to the creaks and rustles of life around you, frogs with opinions, crickets holding heated debates, and the occasional plop of something curious falling into the lake. You try not to imagine what it is. You've learned that sleep comes easier if you assume it's just a fish doing yoga. But tonight isn't for sleeping. Tonight is for observing. By the faint light of a hand-sized oil lamp, you rise and wander barefoot along the outer path of the Chai Nampa. The mud is cool and clingy, but you welcome it. There's something grounding about walking slowly, deliberately, through someone else's design. You notice that the air smells sharper now, as if night unlocks aromas day kept bottled. The sweet breath of flowering squash blossoms, the grassy tang of fresh-cut lakeweed, and something else sour, mossy, ancient. You follow that scent to a corner plot surrounded by thin wooden stakes. There you discover the night-flowering Tlatlauquepatl, a reddish herb said to calm the mind and soften dreams. The Aztecs called it the whispering plant. Some believed it opened a doorway to the ancestors. Others just brewed it into a bedtime tea. You pick a single leaf, hold it to your nose, and feel your thoughts slow. Not sleepy exactly, just unhurried. From a nearby log, Xocoyotzin appears, seemingly out of thin air, like some kind of herbalist ghost. He offers you a bowl. A toll, he grins. But night atoll, with toasted amaranth and a little crushed firefly. You pause. He bursts out laughing. Just kidding. It's cinnamon bark. But you looked so serious. You sip. It's warm and thick and surprisingly nutty. You didn't really appear from nowhere, right? He winks and walks off without answering. You continue your slow patrol. Around the back of the Chai Nampa, there's a raised wooden perch, a sort of lookout where one can sit and view the entire system of plots. You climb up carefully. The wood creaks but holds. From here, you see the moon reflected in each canal like scattered pieces of polished obsidian. The gardens are still, but not lifeless. You can see subtle movements, vines twisting ever so slightly toward moonlight, water rippling as a fish stirs below, and a bat dipping low over the maze for a snack. You notice that several plants seem to bloom only now. The lake lily opens its petals shyly. A white flower, moon-shaped, unfurls near the squash patch. You sketch its details and write a note to yourself. Research lunar bloom cycles. Maybe plants also dream. Historians still argue whether the Aztecs tracked lunar influence on plant behavior beyond ritual calendars. There's scant written proof, but the night gardens feel too precise to be accidental. You descend and follow the path to the compost pit, though pit is too crude a word. It's a three-bin system, tiered and ventilated, filled with layers of lake scum, plant husks, and kitchen scraps. It doesn't stink. It smells alive, like something becoming. You marvel at the balance. Every part of this island has a function even in darkness. The paths are designed with just enough reflection from the water to guide your steps. You walk without needing a torch. You feel like the garden knows you're here, and it's fine with that. Malinal is waiting near the cactus grove. She's wrapped in a shawl, cradling a clay jar. Fireflies come here, she says, pointing. They land on the nopal pads. Maybe they like the dew. You both sit, silent, watching as the air fills with slow-drifting light. The fireflies blink lazily like tired stars trying to remember their lines. You find yourself whispering, though no one else is nearby. How much of this was designed? And how much just happened beautifully? Malinal shrugs. Does it matter? We're part of it now. She's right. You feel it again, that root-deep connection to the land. Even your breath has matched the rhythm of the lake. In, out. Stillness. Ripples. You realize you've stopped thinking in words. Your thoughts now resemble the garden's language, a push of root, a tilt of leaf, a ripple of water, and then something odd. You spot an older gardener across the canal, walking in a pattern. He moves with precision 5 steps forward, 1 to the right, then turns. Over and over. You watch for several minutes. It's too methodical to be random. Malinal, you whisper. What is he doing? She squints. Mapping water flow. Or maybe talking to spirits. You glance at her. Is there a difference? She only smiles. The night deepens. The temperature drops slightly. You shiver, not from cold, but from the sense that you've stumbled into something enormous and slow and gently intelligent. You lie down on a raised wooden walkway, watching the stars flicker through the thin maize stalks. Somewhere, an owl hoots. Somewhere else, a child giggles in their sleep. And beneath you, the garden continues its midnight choreography. You think about writing this all down, but not yet. Some things are meant to settle in the soil of memory before they're harvested. You close your eyes. The Chai Nampa doesn't mind, continues without you. The morning does not begin with a rooster. That would be far too abrupt for the Chai Nampa. Instead, it begins with moisture, a fine, weightless dew that kisses your eyelids awake before the sun even considers rising. You blink into a sky that's just beginning to think about bluing. The stars are faint now, like candlelight behind gauze. The lake mist curls along the edges of the Chinampa, low and silver like a cat brushing against your ankles. You sit up slowly. Every joint cracks a soft, leafy complaint. You slept on a wooden walkway with a folded cloak, and somehow you feel better rested than you have in weeks. Down at the canal's edge, the water is glass again. It reflects your face and something else. A blur of green-yellow. A canoe, barely making a sound as it glides toward your plot. You recognize the figure. The city official with the sky blue sash and the very pointy obsidian stylus. "Oh, great," you mutter. The morning tax ferry. He steps ashore with a nod, sniffing the air like he's judging your compost by scent alone. "Beautiful morning," you say, trying to sound alert. He scribbles something on a folded bark sheet. "Indeed. We're checking maize yields. Hope yours is as lush as it smells." You gesture toward your stalks, tall and rustling gently in the early breeze. "We let the spirits sing to them at night," you joke. He pauses, glances at your muddy feet and wild hair. Then, just for a moment, smiles. "Keep that up. City rations are tight." And just like that, he's gone again. Canoe vanishing into mist like some bureaucratic apparition. You stretch and take a slow stroll around the plot. Morning is the garden's busiest time. The squash blossoms have opened like golden hands, yawning in the sunlight. Bees, drowsy but dutiful, begin their slow zigzag from petal to petal. You kneel by the edge of your plot and pull a single radish from the earth. It emerges with a satisfying squelch, plump, red, proud of itself. You bite into it without thinking. Sharp, peppery, alive. You didn't plant this radish, which is odd. You check your notebook. Maize, beans, squash, amaranth, no radishes. You glance over at a nearby Chinampa and spot a younger gardener grinning. "Gift," they shout across the canal. "For the firefly tea." You raise the radish and salute. A fair trade. Historians still argue whether the Chinampa plots were privately owned, communally rotated, or something in between. Most agree there was a complicated, rotating system involving family stewardship, ritual obligations, and surprise inspections, some of which included impromptu poetry contests. Because of course they did. You gather a small harvest, maize ears, edible flowers, a basket of tiny tomatoes, and prepare for a trip back into the city. Once a week, gardeners like you canoe their produce into Tenochtitlan to trade or submit to the local market quotas. The journey isn't long, but it feels like leaving a meditation and re-entering a carnival. You pack everything carefully, secure your woven sandals, and untie your canoe from its wooden post. With a practiced nudge, you push off into the canal, paddle dipping silently into the water. Around you, dozens of other Chinamperos are doing the same, canoes loaded with bright piles of vegetables, herbs, and the occasional suspiciously bumpy basket that may or may not contain frogs. The canal widens, connecting to the larger waterways that lead toward the city. You pass under a wooden bridge where a child leans over, pretending to be an eagle. "Incoming maize," she shouts. "Secure the perimeter." You salute her with your paddle. The air smells different already. Less earthy, more spiced. Closer to the city, you catch whiffs of cooking masa, simmered chilies, and something you hope is tamale filling and not fermented axolotl. Then the city rises. Tenochtitlan is breathtaking, especially from water level. White stone temples glisten in the sun, their steps sharp and deliberate. Tall towers wrapped in murals depicting hummingbirds and cloud serpents watch over the lake. Market boats are already jostling for space at the docks, their owners shouting greetings and haggles with the ease of morning prayer. You dock gently beside a stall run by a woman who looks like she could command a crocodile into retirement. She grunts in approval as she inspects your tomatoes. "Good color. You water at moonrise?" You nod. "And I whispered compliments." She gives you a deadpan stare, then snorts. "Ha! Might try that." She offers you a trade, your basket of produce for a fine obsidian-tipped hoe and a small jar of smoked chili salt. You shake on it. Her grip could snap a cornstalk in two. You take a moment in the market square, just sitting on a stone bench, breathing it all in. Birds chatter above. A boy is juggling ears of corn for coins. Someone nearby is reciting poetry in a sing-song voice about rain gods and love letters. You wonder what tourists might think, seeing this if tourists existed, and then you hear the chant. Not angry, not rushed, just rhythmic. A group of older women walk through the square, each carrying a tiny bowl of lake mud. They're headed to the temple garden, part of an offering ritual for agricultural harmony. Their steps match the drumbeat played softly on a clay hand drum. You follow at a respectful distance, watching as they scatter the mud in carefully marked beds around the temple's sacred Chinampa. Yes, even the gods have gardens. Later, you head back home. The paddle is heavier now, not from weight, but from the fullness of the day. The Chinampa welcomes you like an old friend. The lake laps the edges as if to say, you're back. Good. You unload your tools and gifts. The smoked chili salt finds its place in your makeshift kitchen. You leave the obsidian hoe leaning against the compost bin like a sword ready for planting, not war. The sun is lower now. You have time for one last task, climbing your little perch and watching the golden hour stretch across the lake. You see yourself reflected in the water. Tired, a bit muddy, but very much alive. And in that moment, you understand, the Chinampa doesn't just grow food. It grows patience, rhythm, humility. It grows you. You wake up the next morning to the low, comforting sound of frogs. Not the dramatic croaking kind, these are more like the sleepy percussion section of a nighttime orchestra. Their rhythm is oddly meditative. You lie there half awake, listening to their call and response echoing softly across the lake. It's still dark, but a sliver of gray light is beginning to outline the wooden beams of your shelter. You stretch under your woven blanket, which still smells faintly of lake herbs and damp wood smoke, and roll onto your side. A few strands of maize silk cling to your elbow from yesterday's harvest. You make a mental note. Maybe don't sleep directly on the sorting mat again. This morning, you decide, will be one for tasks you've been putting off, the quiet chores that rarely make the records but still shaped every inch of Chinampa life. First up, fixing the reed barriers. You splash water on your face from the canal, which is freezing enough to jolt a calendar year out of your memory. Then you shuffle to the edge of your plot, where the woven reed walls that hold the soil in place are sagging just slightly, probably due to yesterday's paddle wake or maybe a sneaky duck with boundary issues. With a bundle of dried tule reeds and a stone-tipped awl, you begin weaving in new support. Over under, tug tight. The work is repetitive and satisfying, like threading a lake-scented tapestry. As you tighten each section, you imagine how many hands over how many generations must have performed this same task. Adjusting the same damp edges, listening to the same frogs, grumbling about the same reeds poking the same fingers. Historians still argue whether these maintenance jobs were done by individual families, rotating community crews, or dedicated mud myths, a delightful term from one Spanish chronicler who clearly didn't get the memo that gardener works just fine. Halfway through, your neighbor rows up beside you, balancing a basket of feathers and lake clay. Morning, she calls out. You still naming your squash plants? You blink. Only the spirited ones. She nods solemnly. Let me know if any talk back. She's headed to a ceremonial plot near the temple district, where ritual gardens are cultivated with even more care than the food ones. There, the vegetables aren't just grown, they're sung to, bathed in flower water, and sometimes, yes, named. One rumor insists a priest once married a particularly radiant pumpkin. You don't know if it's true, but you kind of hope it is. You finish the reeds and turn to your next project. Repairing the floating walkway that connects your Chinampa to the neighboring ones. It's made from bundles of juniper and cypress branches, bound tight with maguey fiber, and after several weeks, it's begun to dip with a dramatic flare whenever someone walks across it. Last time, you nearly pitched headfirst into the canal while carrying a basket of hot tamales, which would have been undignified at best and bird food at worst. As you haul new wood onto the walkway, a chorus of gulls bursts into the sky above you, flapping like someone yelled snack in bird speak. They spiral up into the morning air, their reflections darting across the lake's surface like scattered petals. You pause and take it in, the mirror-glass stillness of the water, the crisscross patterns of boat wakes, the tiny ripple where a fish just surfaced, then vanished again. Then there's the smell, damp earth, lake grass, and the unmistakable scent of chili cooking somewhere nearby. Your stomach growls, rudely interrupting the serenity. You dig into your pouch for a small corn cake wrapped in a banana leaf, now slightly warm from your body heat. One bite and your whole face remembers why this life is worth living. Maize, beans, and maybe just the tiniest smear of guava paste someone traded you last week. With the walkway secure and breakfast handled, you paddle to a nearby island where you've been experimenting with wildflowers. Some of these were used in dyes, others in medicine, and at least one, so chill, was rumored to whisper your fortune in the right moonlight. You kneel beside them, gently brushing a few petals. They're delicate but determined, sprouting in tidy rows you didn't quite intend to be so straight. You've heard tell of Chinampa-based herbalists who once traveled between floating gardens like apothecary pirates, trading crushed blossoms and lake roots for secrets, charms, and maybe a chicken if it was a good day. You try humming to the flowers, just to see. Nothing happens, but a nearby duck blinks at you like it's evaluating your pitch. Next, you check the compost mound. And yes, every Chinampa had one. This one is a mix of decaying lake plants, maize husks, duck droppings, and a few inedible mystery gourds you accidentally bred last season. The heat coming off it is impressive. You poke a stick into the center and watch a lazy plume of steam rise up, curling like a sleeping serpent. Compost might not be glamorous, but it is the engine of your garden. Every spent plant, every husk and stalk, cycles back into nourishment. Nothing is wasted, not even your mistakes. You turn the pile with a broad paddle and are briefly ambushed by a very enthusiastic beetle. After it buzzes off, you notice, oddly enough, that a tiny sprig of tomato is growing right out of the compost. It's bright, alive, and absolutely not following any planting guidelines. You leave it. Back on your main plot, you kneel to tend the beans climbing your cane poles. They twist skyward like they're racing each other to the sun. One vine has grown in the shape of a loose spiral, like it's trying out a new hairstyle. As you pinch off a withered leaf, you find yourself murmuring thanks. Not loud, not performative, just a quiet word for the miracle of mud and seed and patient water. Because here's the thing about a Chinampa, you don't control it. Not really. You collaborate. You adapt. You wait. Sometimes you listen, and sometimes, when the light hits right and the ducks aren't yelling, you almost believe the garden is listening back. You glide back across the water just as the sun lifts fully above the horizon, painting the canal with that honey-colored sheen that makes everything look like it belongs in a legend. Your paddle dips silently, rhythmically, scoop, pull, ripple. The wake behind you is so gentle it barely disturbs a floating leaf shaped like a heart. Today, it's time to visit the market. You're not in the mood for haggling, but your neighbor needs medicinal bark, and you've got surplus amaranth greens that are practically sprouting through your roof. So, with a bundle of herbs on your back and a basket of greens nestled in your lap, you guide your canoe toward the Chinampaside market stalls that bloom like water lilies on certain days of the calendar. And here's where things get cozy chaotic. Boats are docked nose to nose along the canal edge. Floating platforms, some with woven awnings, bob gently as merchants call out in sing-song voices. It's not loud, it's not that kind of place, but it hums with quiet purpose. Someone's tapping a hand drum. Someone else is heating tamales over a reed fire that smells so good you instantly question every decision that led to your current breakfast. A girl in a painted cloak is selling carved obsidian combs, too expensive. Next to her, a boy is trading painted gourds for feathers. You hand over your amaranth greens to a very focused woman with more tattoos than teeth. She mutters a blessing in Nahuatl as she gives you 2 bundles of bark, a small pouch of ground chili, and what appears to be a duck feather painted gold. Historians still debate whether Chinampa market trade followed standardized pricing, barter etiquette, or was simply a kind of socially polite chaos that worked out because no one wanted to get cursed over a squash. With the trade done, you wander the lanes, marveling at the variety. Slabs of cactus, freshwater shrimp stored in hollow gourds, little dried fish strung on reed strings like aquatic jewelry, and jars of that famous chocolatl. The bitter, spiced cacao drink that makes your eyes twitch and your heart sing. A vendor offers you a small gourd of it, frothed with a stick, just the way the nobles liked it. You sip, and immediately your whole spine stands up straighter. It's like drinking firewater made from poetry and old secrets. You thank them and wander on, the canal breeze now feeling crisper, more alive. By midday, you're back in your canoe, drifting slowly toward home. You pass a priest tending to a ceremonial garden, this one shaped in a perfect spiral. He nods at you, fingers dusted with ash, his robe embroidered with blue-green feathers and tiny bells that barely chime as he moves. He's planting marigolds in a circle around a tiny obsidian altar. You pretend not to notice when he murmurs something to the flowers. Honestly, same. There's a brief drizzle in the afternoon, soft, almost polite rain that makes everything smell like newness. Your Chinampa soaks it up like a sponge. You stand for a moment with your arms outstretched, letting the droplets cool your sun-warmed skin. Somewhere across the water, a flute plays a single line of melody that fades as soon as you try to follow it. Later, the sun stretches long across the lake, turning the canals gold again. It's nearly evening. You've stacked your traded bark and herbs in the shelter, hung the chili to dry, and now sit quietly by the edge of your garden, toes just brushing the water. A dragonfly zips past your ear like a tiny jeweled dagger on a mission. It lands on a floating lily pad and sits perfectly still, watching the water like a philosopher. You realize you haven't spoken for over an hour. Not a word. The Chinampa has its own rhythm, its own grammar. Talking sometimes feels like interrupting. Dinner is simple: tamales wrapped in banana leaf, a bowl of beans with lake herbs, and a square of pumpkin candy given to you by the canoe boy with the painted gourds. As you eat, the stars begin to appear. First just one, then a scattered handful. Soon, the sky fills like a bowl of shining seeds. The wind picks up just enough to rustle the maize leaves. Somewhere out in the dark, a night heron calls. A sound like a creaky hinge that somehow doesn't disturb the peace at all. You lie back on your sleeping mat, wrapped in a reed fiber blanket, full and tired in the way that only lake gardeners understand. Your limbs ache slightly, your hair smells of wind and chilly, and your mind is soft with the weight of an ordinary, beautiful day. You think of the compost pile, the gold-painted duck feather, the marigolds around the altar, the rogue tomato in the compost heap. Little things. Quiet things. But they add up to something vast and living. Because Chinampas aren't just gardens, they're memory. Layer upon layer of intention, labor, and leftover beans folded into lake and soil and time. You close your eyes and feel your body float, not literally, not yet, but in spirit. Suspended gently between earth and water and sky like a seed still deciding which way to sprout. You wake before dawn again, not because you have to, but because you want to. The lake has a mood in the twilight that you don't like missing. It's velvet smooth, a shifting mirror of blues and faint grays, the whole world holding its breath. You sit up, stretch slowly, and feel your joints complain in that comforting way that says, you've lived another day. A lone bird cuts across the water like a sentence in a language you almost remember. You pad barefoot across your reed-covered sleeping platform and duck into the garden enclosure. This morning's task is humble: repair a small retaining wall where the soil is beginning to slide. Mud, more mud, and your hands welcome it like an old friend. It's cold, smells rich, and clings lovingly to your nails. You press fresh woven mats into place, stake down the corners with willow branches, and add a layer of compost. Not glamorous, but satisfying. It's the kind of work that doesn't need praise, just patience. Some Chinamperos believed the garden spirits, small, leaf-draped creatures only glimpsed in the corner of your eye, would bless your harvest if you whispered to the maize. So you do. You kneel beside a young stalk and say, very softly, grow tall. Don't fall. No leaf rot this time, please. The stalk doesn't respond, but you swear the wind pauses in acknowledgement. You pause to eat a handful of soaked amaranth seeds sweetened with honey. Sticky, nutty, faintly floral. It tastes like morning. Later in the day, you row to the far edge of the lake, where old Chinampas have begun returning to nature. These ghost gardens are thick with willow, moss, and rumors. The air here feels different, cooler, quieter. Frogs nest in forgotten irrigation trenches. Giant water lilies float like sleeping shields. And there, in the middle of it all, is a half-submerged altar carved with spirals you don't recognize. Historians still argue whether Chinampa altars marked calendar cycles, rainfall predictions, or merely which family laid claim to which floating square. Whatever it was, the vibe is respectfully mysterious. You kneel before it and leave a tiny offering: 3 dried chili peppers and a flower plucked from your own garden. Not because you're superstitious, but because it feels polite. Rowing back, your paddle schemes past the roots of ahujote trees, the famous willows that gave the Chinampas their sturdy bones. Their roots, stretching down into lakebed silt, are what let floating gardens become nearly permanent. You pause and let your hand trail in the water, touching the wet bark. There's moss growing in thick green ropes along one trunk. It smells damp and ancient. You think about how the Aztecs didn't just live near the lake. They built with it, into it, through it. They braided land and water like hair until one could no longer exist without the other. In town, you once heard a poem painted on a codex wall: this city is made of flowers and sadness. And you get it now. Because the lake gives beauty, and it also takes. Chinampas rot if neglected. Storms wash away months of work. Crops fail. Canoes tip. Lovers leave. But the garden remains if you let it. Back home, a neighbor calls out across the water, needs help retrieving a canoe that drifted off in the night. You go, of course. That's the rule out here. If someone's paddle slips, someone else throws the rope. The lake teaches cooperation whether you like it or not. You guide the loose canoe back gently, nudging it with your own. As you return it, the neighbor tosses you a gift: a dried fish tied with maguey fiber, stuffed with something that smells like lime and pepper. You both nod, no words exchanged. Trade complete. Friendships out here are built on gestures, not speeches. By now the sun is high again. You spend the afternoon tying up squash vines with braided reeds and brushing beetles off your bean plants with a goose feather. It's a slow rhythm. You hum a song your grandmother used to sing. Something about frogs and rain and getting old. You forget half the words and make up new ones. The beans don't seem to mind. At one point, a canoe glides silently past your chinampa. In it is an elderly woman in an embroidered shawl, sitting perfectly still beside a heap of marigolds. She catches your eye and raises one hand in greeting, then disappears around a bend in the canal. You're not sure whether she was real or spirit. Maybe both. Maybe it doesn't matter. Evening rolls in like ink dropped into water. Slow, swirling, soft. You sit by your canal edge again, feet dangling just above the water's surface. A toad croaks lazily from somewhere behind your shelter. Fireflies dance above the lake in their usual casual choreography. You light a small cooking fire. Not because you're hungry, but because flame is comforting. You boil water and toss in a pinch of wild mint. As it simmers, the steam curls upward in tight, fragrant spirals. You watch until the steam fades into the sky. Above you, stars blink on, one by one. And somewhere far across the water, a flute plays again. It's the same tune as yesterday, or maybe it's always been playing. In the deep hush of night, the chinampa sighs. Not literally, of course, but there's a sound the wind makes as it schemes across the tall maize leaves, and the water laps at the roots of the garden like it's trying to remember a song. You sit still, wrapped in your rough cotton cloak, watching the dark garden glow with starlight and firefly pulses. It's almost too beautiful to be sleepy. Almost, you're meant to be checking the boundary stakes, those carefully spaced posts that mark where your plot ends and someone else's begins. But no one's patrolling this late. The stakes are more suggestion than law anyway. The lake rearranges them some nights, just for fun. A frog hops onto your lap. You look down at it. It looks up at you. You share a moment, both equally confused. There's an old Chinamparo saying, if the frogs trust you, so will the rain. You gently lift the frog and place it back on a damp lily pad. No need to test fate. As you drift along the canal now, your canoe barely brushing the edges of the reeds, you begin to wonder what these floating gardens might look like from above. Imagine being a bird flying over, tiny, dark rectangles stretching across a glittering lake, stitched together like a woven quilt of mud and life. Some glow with torches. Others are just dark outlines. All of them alive. Historians still debate exactly how the Chinampa grid system was coordinated, whether it was community councils, priestly calendars, or some unspoken logic of proximity and barter. What's clearer is that they worked, somehow. For hundreds of years. Feeding tens of thousands. With no diesel engines. No synthetic fertilizer. Just dirt, time, and canoe loads of night soil. You try not to think too hard about that part. Tonight, you're ferrying compost. Yes, again. Because growing a city's worth of food on floating gardens requires, let's just say, constant enthusiasm. The compost bundle is tightly tied with palm fiber, and as you row, you notice it's leaking slightly. The scent is not ideal, but it's warm, which is oddly reassuring in the midnight chill. Back on your chinampa, you gently work the compost into your soil. Your fingers disappear up to the knuckles in mud. The earth is warm, soft, and surprisingly fragrant once you get past the initial notes. You imagine you're tucking the roots into bed. Good night, chili plant. Sleep tight, bean sprout. May the worms dream of juicy leaves. Just then, a shadow passes overhead, probably a heron. But for a second, you imagine it's an awazal, the mythical water creature the old folks warned about. With its hand on its tail and tendency to drag careless canoeists into the depths, it's not exactly bedtime story material. Still, it adds a little drama to the otherwise gentle evening. Your eyes grow heavy, but you still have one more task. The ceremonial watering. Some Chinamparos still follow an old tradition. The last watering of the day, done in silence, under moonlight. You fill a gourd from your canal, careful not to wake the sleeping ducks nearby, and pour water slowly at the base of your tomato plants. The soil drinks it in with a quiet, greedy sound. You do the same for the herbs, the flowers, the single struggling avocado tree that you're too stubborn to give up on. You whisper a few words, not prayers exactly. Just thanks. You're tired. Your shoulders ache. There's lake mud in your hair and probably a mosquito planning a very small party on your ankle. But something about this floating patch of earth, your chinampa, your quilt of roots and compost, makes everything feel okay. It floats. You float. Eventually, you return to your sleeping mat. The stars are so bright now they make your eyes hurt. You pull your cloak over your shoulders and lie back. Somewhere across the water, an owl calls. Somewhere closer, a frog offers its firm opinion on everything. The fire has burned low. The lake is flat as glass. And your last thought before dreams take you is that this place, this absurd, brilliant, ever-muddy floating garden, has held you up one more day.